Good afternoon and welcome to our September 22nd, 2022 Board Business Meeting. Welcome to our board members, MCPS staff, and members of our community who are joining us here today, and to those who are watching this meeting via live stream on the MCPS website and MCPS TV. Let us begin by standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will now call the roll to recognize board members to establish that we have a quorum, starting with Dr. Joftis.
Good afternoon. Apologies for taking the meeting in bed today.
Mr. Kim.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Ms. Harris.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Ms. Mandrowski.
Hello, good afternoon.
Ms. Silvestri.
Good afternoon.
And Dr. Daka.
Good afternoon.
And I'm Brenda Wolf. Now we can begin the meeting with the approval of the revised agenda.
Move approval. Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. And that is unanimous of those present. We're now up to item number 3, and I'll turn it over to Dr. McKnight.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, President Wolf. Today we bring forward 2 appointments to the Board of Education. The first appointment is for Ms. Jessica M. Baxter as Director of Public Information in the Department of Communications in the Office of the Chief of Staff. Ms. Baxter is joined today by her husband, John, children, Jake and Andrew, and her parents, Maria and Placido Mahano. Ms. Baxter is a graduate of Wheaton High School, brings to Montgomery County Public Schools more than 15 years of experience as a public affairs and marketing specialist, communications analyst, public information officer, crisis communication specialist, director of communications and engagement, and most recently as director of strategic communications. Ms. Baxter is excited to bring her collective experience to help lead MCPS with public information.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous.
Thank you. Our next appointment we're bringing forward is Ms. Aisha Bowe as Director of News and Marketing in the Department of Communications in the Office of the Chief of Staff. Ms. Bowe, who graduated from John F. Kennedy High School, brings to MCPS more than 7 years of experience as a multimedia journalist, anchor, producer, and most recently as a field journalist. Ms. Bowe looks forward to joining the MCPS family and to share amazing stories of one of the best school systems in the country.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous.
And there is Ms. Bowe joining us online. Congratulations. Thank
you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, continue.
Okay. For item 4,
Yes.
we do have a few recognitions. Our first recognition is for National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Whereas October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month in the United States. The official theme for the observance, disability, part of the equity equation, recognizes the vital role that people with disabilities play in making the nation's workforce diverse and inclusive. Montgomery County Public Schools, as part of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, recognizes the importance of embracing inclusive practices and policies that promote the benefits of a diverse workplace that recognizes every person for his or her abilities. MCPS holds the core values that each and every student matters. Outcomes should not be predictable by race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. Equity demands the elimination of all gaps, and creating and maximizing future opportunities for students and staff is necessary. MCPS is committed to preparing students, including students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, to be ready for college, career, and community. MCPS is committed to partnering with families to support student academic success and social and emotional well-being. MCPS is committed to enhancing all students with social and emotional well-being and value for diversity and differences. Now therefore be it resolved that the Montgomery County Board of Education Superintendent of Schools declare the month of October 2022 as National Disability Employment Awareness Month in Montgomery County Public Schools and encourage staff members in schools to sponsor and participate in activities in honor of its recognition.
Move approval. Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous. Dr. Daca?
I just wanted to let everyone know that not only does MCPS recognize, but they try to work very closely with handicapped persons, and I have appreciated all the help that I've gotten, and they are working on making all the buildings accessible, so I appreciate them being an employer that thinks about other persons.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Daca. Our second recognition is recognizing Walk to School Day. Walk to School Day is celebrated by thousands of schools from all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, and more than 40 countries worldwide. Children who walk to school have been found to have higher academic performance in terms of attention, alertness, verbal, numeric, and reasoning abilities. Walking to school can further foster personal growth by developing a sense of independent decision-making, emotional bonds with peers, and natural environment. Walking to school helps reduce the amount of air pollutants emitted by vehicles. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and the Superintendent of Schools proclaim October 5th, 2022 as Walk to School Day, and be it further resolved that the school system notify the public and school community of Walk to School Day, publicize this resolution and the school system's participation through internal and external communications, and encourage everyone to consider the safety of pedestrians and in particular student walkers and bicyclists every day.
Move approval. Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're now up to item number 5, which is public comments. Public comments is one of our opportunities to hear the views and receive the advice of community members. Board members will take your comments into consideration, but it is not our practice to take action at this time on issues that are raised. We encourage public input on policy, program, and practices. This is not the proper avenue to address specific student or employee matters, so we encourage everyone to utilize existing avenues of redress for complaints. This is a public meeting, and we expect the conduct of all speakers and members of the audience to be within the bounds of proper etiquette. Inappropriate personal remarks, rude retorts, or other such behavior is out of order and will not be tolerated. Those who demonstrate disruptive or disrespectful behavior during public comments may be asked to leave the room. Please check our website for information about upcoming board meetings, hearings, and work sessions, including any changes to our meeting start times. We have 5 people signed up to provide in-person testimony. Each speaker will receive 2 minutes for comments. When your name is called, please approach the table, speak clearly and directly into the microphone. 30 seconds prior to the expiration of a speaker's time, a yellow light will go on accompanied by a beep. A red light and a buzzer signals that your time has expired. Please push the flat button below the microphone to turn it on and begin speaking. Push the same button to turn it off. In addition to our in-person speakers today, we have 1 audio testimony presentation. We will play these submissions once the in-person testimonies have concluded. Copies of testimonies can be found on board docs where they are posted with the other materials for this meeting. At this time, I'm going to call Kimber Kane, Lyric Winnick, and Susan Eckerly to the table. Please speak in the order that you were called. Thank you.
Dr. McKnight and members of the Board of Education, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Kimber Kane, and I'm here on behalf of the Montgomery County Education Association. I'm a member organizer this year after many years at Roscoe Nix and Joanne Lellick Elementary Schools. What is exciting about my current role is that my work is centered on hearing what the community has to say and then actively doing something with it, which can lead to a lot of buzzwords. The buzzword we are now hearing is equity. With that in mind, MCEA is really looking forward to the results of the MCPS's equity audit. Commitment to equality is a hallmark at MCEA, and a commitment to recognizing where we can grow, where we are missing the mark, and pivoting when necessary. True equity, after all, is not achieved through inconsistent work, but through consistent action. It is with consistent action that organizations like CASA and Action in Montgomery have fought for labor rights and housing stability for people without status. Communities in the county often share how rough things are for their students, including the feeling of not being sure if they're going to be welcome in the place where they should actually feel the safest. It is through consistent action that we've made many efforts in support of equity. MCEA has supported diversity hiring for all staff, as well as culturally responsive curriculum and restorative justice practices, because the equity conversation is not complete until every voice is in the room. We support community school liaisons like Daisy Castro at Wheaton Woods Elementary, so that CSLs can do the job they were hired to do, and that the resources promised in pursuit of this model are provided equitably. We should drop a pin anywhere in the county and every student would be receiving the same education. MCEA is excited to learn where our equity work has been impactful and where we need to rethink, create new strategies. We're excited to then come together with your team, Dr. McKnight, and members of the community to truly build equitable communities. That is, after all, the job we were all hired to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Winnick.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Lyric Winnick, president of the BCC High School PTSA, a 2,350 student high school with 220 teachers and staff. I'm going to start where several thousand parents and students started at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, September 14th. Text between a 10th grade student and a parent. Student, I'm on the 3rd floor and someone on the 3rd floor has a gun. Parent, oh God, stay quiet. Do you hear police in the halls? Student, I heard a heavy sound but really far away. At my chair, doors locked. Thousands of these texts were sent during the nearly 60-minute lockdown. Students barricaded doors. Teachers heroically put their students in closets and pottery kilns and stood watch, believing a shooter was roaming the halls. Thankfully, there was no shooter and no gun. But many things also went wrong. The PA system didn't always work. Some teachers didn't hear or thought it was a drill. Procedures weren't followed. Doors weren't locked or didn't lock. One 9th grader, watching his room door slowly open, thought, today is the day that I die. For nearly an hour, no one from MCPS shared basic information with teachers or families. I've submitted 12 pages of written public testimony, but I have 3 must-do solutions. 1, MCPS must create an emergency communication system for every school to share information and provide staff updates in real time. The current situation is unsafe for students, staff, and first responders. MCPS must also contact families first, not the press. 2, MCPS needs to address building safety and deferred maintenance. 3, provide a paid in-school service day for staff emergency training on all major emergencies. But we need more. We need to address how our schools respond to fighting, safety conditions in the bathrooms, and community building. We need students to have mentors and trusted adults inside our schools and to connect our families with our schools. I am in awe of the incredible kids, teachers, and staff at BCC. What went right were the people inside. Please make them at every school your first priority every morning.
Thank you. Ms. Eckerly.
Good afternoon, Dr. McKnight and school board members. My name is Susan Eckerly. I'm the Director of Bands at Wooten High School. I'm representing 15% of MCPS students, or 23,984 students who are enrolled in instrumental music, advocating for more funding for our programs. I'd like to share that we're continuing to build our sense of community in our classes, and in my case, Wooten music students are thriving this year. Individual schools are responsible for replacing aging instruments, and that is not happening. Schools have O3 instructional funds, but it's not enough to purchase instruments. Right now, we also do not have enough instruments, so students are sharing instruments. Can you imagine sharing an instrument another student has used 5 minutes prior to this? Thankfully, our PTSA and our Patrons Arts combined have purchased 11 instruments in the last 5 years for us, while MCPS has purchased none. Our booster clubs should not be responsible for the purchase of materials needed for instruction. Also, MCPS instrument repair formula is archaic. The coordinator of instrumental music and theater receives a static budget, and from that amount, repair money is allocated in 3 areas. For secondary instrument repair, the amount is allocated to each school is based on enrollment. A tuba costs the same to be repaired whether it's used in a band of 30 students or a band of 130. Instruments that are older usually require more repair, and the repair formula does not take this issue into consideration. Enrollment in instrumental music classes increased this year, but the total amount for repair remained the same as last year's. Schools are being allocated less money per student to repair instruments, yet more instruments are in use and repair costs continue to increase. Another influx of money occurs when a building is renovated, and Wooten has never been renovated. Because of this lack of renovation, our infrastructure is falling apart, including our instruments. Wooten students work very hard and represent our county well on state and national level and deserve an updated learning environment and materials and instruction. On behalf of the instrumental music students of our school system, I respectfully request you prioritize funding for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next, I'll call up Kimberly Glassman and Cynthia Simonson. Ms. Glassman, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Dr. McKnight and members of the board. My name is Kim Glassman. I'm the parent of 3 MCPS students attending Shady Grove Middle and Magruder High School. I'm here today as one of the MCC-PTA Magruder Cluster Coordinators. I echo Ms. Winnick's testimony about crisis communication, and I also remind you that we had a school shooting at Magruder 8 months and 1 day ago. As a community, we continue to wait for MCPS to act with urgency to meet with our community, as you are in response to BCC. On January 21st, I received a frantic text from my son. Mom, we're going into lockdown. Dr. Evans is running and out of breath. I headed to Magruder, expecting to find a parent waiting area, a place to wait, instructions from authorities. Instead, I found a closed road, police unaware of what to tell parents, and no instructions. Parents' cars lined the streets. At 4 p.m., more than 2 hours later, we received a message that dismissal would be soon. At 6:23 p.m., I emailed our director asking for communication to our community because we were waiting for our children to be dismissed. At 6:27, following my email, another message came about dismissal. And at 6:53, my son texted to come find him. He was walking from the school in the parking lot, and I found a place to park my car and some grass on the side of the road. There was no clear protocol. Last week, there was a false alarm at BCC, and again, a clear lack of crisis communication. Ms. Winnick's testimony includes the same concerns we have shared as a community from Magruder for the last 8 months. While that day was stressful for all, there's no comparison to what the students in the classroom where the shooter was found have experienced. They have received no communication and no follow-up as a classroom community to the additional trauma that they faced. We acknowledge many things went right, but we ask that MCPS acknowledge what went wrong that day. The after-action report lacks specificity and lacks accurate details. It ignores delayed reunification, ignores lockdown procedures that were not followed, a class being dismissed mid-lockdown, and an alleged shooter making his way into the room.
Thank you.
We ask that you please do better.
We have your testimony. Thank you. Ms. Simonson.
I'm Cynthia Simonson, and 2 of my children were in lockdown at Magruder High School on January 21st, 2022. Like the BCC PTSA president, I have no criticism of how the Magruder School administration handled the shooting at our high school, and I readily acknowledge there were thousands of things that went right that day. I understand no crisis response is ever perfect. It's a crisis. People are involved. It will be imperfect. But every crisis is an opportunity to learn and do better. Unfortunately, MCPS is notoriously incapable of admitting mistakes. And the after-action report is another example where MCPS has swept away the most critically important aspects that would serve as lessons learned for our system and instead glossed over those elements. That's wrong. I know this needs to be corrected, and I know the system, the players, the regulations, the options, so I have been guiding our parent leaders to the avenues in place that are referenced in the script the board president reads before each public comment period. And where has that gotten us? 8 months and 1 day, and we still feel ignored. I think I understand why. I think there are things that didn't go well, mistakes were made. The appointees are tasked to protect the brand, and that makes it impossible to openly acknowledge the failings of what we currently have in place. And instead, we continue to hear our leaders thank and congratulate and laud everyone and pivot away from the conversations that would lead to those critical questions that highlight the true lessons that should have been learned that day. And that, quite frankly, that's the offensive part. BCC families should have had a different experience last week. You have had 8 months and 1 day to learn from the Magruder families about what needs to be improved in crisis response. How many more days will this board allow the system to ignore the Magruder community and refuse to hear our feedback? I've included 3 key asks below. Schedule that meeting with the families in the Honors Algebra 2 classroom where the shooter was apprehended, and schedule a separate meeting with the community at large. Provide an accurate, detailed timeline of what occurred.
Thank you,
and
Ms.
amend the
Simonson.
protocols
We
to
have your
differentiate between
testimony.
active shooter and the suspect. Thank you.
We received 1 audio testimony submitted by Daniel Gall. Please play the audio.
I am Dan Gall, parent of Awen and Alira, students in the MCPS Virtual Academy, and representative of no other group. I've provided extended testimony via PDF with arguments and links to scientific papers and expert testimony before other governing bodies like OSHA. I'm here to speak about 3 topics: indoor air quality and the once and future pandemic, the intersection of law enforcement and education, and when and how to introduce polemic works to students. It is crucial that MCPS reduce carbon dioxide in indoor spaces below 600 parts per million. This is true for equity, as not all parents are able to keep their children home in order to have them attend the virtual academy. It's true for public health, as it will reduce the transmission of the current and future pandemic viruses or pathogens. And it is true for academic performance reasons as well. Decision-making is proven to suffer as CO2 is increased above 600 parts per million. I am here to speak against police lecturing of students, especially on equity grounds, minority and historically oppressed students, on any topic, least of all gun education, which is a crime where they will be charged as adults for a crime defined in part by being a child. And lastly, it is imperative that students not be introduced or assigned polemic works until after they've been properly taught how to engage them. And how to engage them is skeptically and with a first pass to verify the author's intellectual integrity. Thank you for your time. Good day.
This concludes our public comments. The next business meeting of the Board of Education for public comment is Tuesday, October the 11th. Sign-ups will begin the evening of Tuesday, October the 4th. In addition to the online sign-ups for public comment, we have returned to the practice of in-person same-day sign-ups when space allows. Unallocated slots may be filled on a first-come, first-served basis on the day of the meeting. In order to sign up in person, please arrive at least 15 to 20 minutes before the start of the open session and sign the form. In-person sign-ups will close 15 minutes before public comment begins or when all slots are filled. At this time, I will entertain comments from our board members. I will ask one question, though, Dr. McKnight, about the PA system at BCC. If someone could take a look at that. It's more of a comment than a question. Thank you. If you turn your light on, if you have a comment, did you want to respond? Oh, I saw you turn your light on. It's not a, it's just a comment that somebody should take a look at that.
Yeah.
Ms. Mandrowski.
Yeah, I was
actually going to mention something about that as well. And I know that later in the meeting, we have an agenda item or a consent item referencing radios, and I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that at all while people are paying attention to this issue here now.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to say thank you to all who came forward and shared their experiences. Every time a student in this system experiences anything that makes them feel uncomfortable or at harm, then that's a serious situation. And our duty is to protect the interests of our students in the system, and I just want to reiterate that. That's our commitment, that's what we stand by, and that's what we're going to do. In the spirit of always improving, and that is what I will continue to say, as we navigate some of these situations, like, for instance, what happened at BCC, and I heard loud and clear that the intercom system wasn't working in a way in which it interfered with communication with some of our staff. We absolutely will get on that. On the consent items today, I think it was
It's about radios.
about radios, yes. Ed came forward a couple of meetings ago and talked about that, it being an ongoing process of us assessing all of these communications in our buildings. It is an ongoing process because, you know, even when we repair one, the next week something could happen. And so I believe that it's important for us to continue to update that and share with our communities what those communication systems are that are impeding in any communication that we're going to need in an emergency situation. So we do have that on a consent item, but I want to be clear, that's one step in the right direction to resolve that. But then when we put those items in buildings, we're going to have to see how they work. And so we will be working with that, and I make that commitment again. We're going to continue to work with our principals and our staff to make sure we're getting updated on what's working, what's not, so that we can be responsive when something breaks. Or if we know that something's impeding with communication, being proactive in what we can do to address that. I do want to just say we should be proactive in this, and I, again, acknowledge that every time harm is brought to the community, we have one of these situations, we had a call that we had to make at BCC, then yes, of course, the Magruder community is going to feel the same, because it's like trauma happening again. It's reminding them of that incident. But I know there's been some work done with trying to bring those communities together to address that and to most specifically say, you know, what is it that we need to do to have the follow-up in place to make everyone in this community feel comfortable. So Dr. Murphy, I'd ask you to share that, and Ms. Rubin, if you're in the room, if you can come down to share that as well.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight. I know there's been some issues recently concerning Bethesda Chevy Chase regarding the lockdown procedures, and we are making sure that all staff have the proper training and background and going back and reviewing that, even with those individuals who are coming into our building under substitute status. We also are planning a community meeting, which is coming up on Tuesday, September the 27th. And there has been a lot of involvement there with the principal as well as central office staff. I think one of the things that I'd like to see us do as a community-wide is communicate what the expectations are going to be as far as what a lockdown is, what a shelter-in-place is, what the community can expect for communication, and how we're going to operate. And so we will be getting that wrapped up and getting that out to the community. I also think we can do a better job in shrinking the timeline between when we take some action and communicating that to all constituents, most significantly in our parents, and I appreciate the concern and recognize that, but also our students and our staff and the community at large. We are working with a variety of agencies to be able to accomplish that, so more updates will be coming here shortly, and I think I recognize this as a priority for us to be able to move forward on this agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Ms. Rubin?
Yes, good afternoon, members of the board and our community. I certainly align myself with what Dr. McKnight shared as well as Dr. Murphy in referencing that oftentimes it's the impact, and we know that traumatic events bring about a great deal of anxiety. Specific to Magruder, I would like to offer just some feedback in reference to the plan that we put in place immediately, and certainly we know the impact that that had on our community, and sometimes these things may not always be visible. There is room for us to continue to grow, and we certainly welcome the opportunity to continue our work in this realm. But if you'll just allow me, on January the 21st, which was the day of the event, There were direct supports provided from MCPS as well as MCPD, and direct check-ins that occurred with the students who were in the classroom with the student who was ultimately apprehended. And we certainly have an internal timeline that we're using to track that. On January 22nd, we actually held a community meeting via Zoom due to the COVID situation and the pandemic. Present at that meeting were MCPS staff, MCPD, as well as HHS staff. We additionally had Zoom sessions that continued for that week. Those support sessions were differentiated to offer specific supports to the students identified in that particular classroom, as well as to any students in the school who felt that they were impacted and needed that. There were one-on-one supports provided with mental health therapists as well. On January 24th, there was a staff meeting that was held with MCPS supports, and we certainly fielded the concern of staff members in that community and worked to put in place an even more robust support plan. On January 26th through the 28th, we implemented and really solidified our crisis recovery plan for the school at the time, taking into consideration some of the things that we learned in the process. During first period at the school, there was an acknowledgement of what the crisis support plan would look like. Again, we had the Zoom supports with the crisis team in place. There was one-to-one follow-up identified for students, and certainly we appreciated our therapy dog pals who were also in place for that support. From January through June, we've had weekly mental health and security check-ins with the principal and school staff. On March 15th, there was a community meeting held. That community meeting was facilitated by members of our restorative justice team, our equity team, our counseling and social worker staff. That was held with parents. The agenda items were restorative justice, school-based social workers and the supports that they could provide, equity and how we were going to use that as a guiding line for our supports, destigmatizing mental health care, trauma-informed care and practices, and how parents could help their students with the events, the tragic events that occurred. We also, at that time, were staffed up. Magruder was one of the first recipients of our social worker staff supports. On June 30th, there was a meeting, Magruder After Action Report meeting, that really discussed with members who presented timing of the release, content of that report, as well as the next steps. And then during the spring to summer, we engaged in some robust hiring and onboarding of social workers to support the school. And then the school engaged in deep trauma-informed care, teaching, and practices during the summer. I think there were some specific asks that were made that we're still working on the community with, but I did want to offer the opportunity to outline the supports that we've put in place for the school following that incident.
I appreciate that, and I'll let you, I was just, as a follow-up, I would like it if you could give us a timeline of when you expect some of these community meetings or whatever it is that they need, timeline for addressing these asks from both schools and from multiple communities. Thank you.
Also, I'd like to say that we'd like to be informed when the meeting is, because
Right.
some of us would probably like to attend. Thank you.
That's what I meant by the timeline. Also, I just, Dr. McKnight and I had a conversation about this yesterday, day before. For the parents, I understand the importance. Don't want to get emotional. But having been through one of those situations when my children were in elementary school and there was a pipe bomb outside the school and whatever, and I was telling her, I know we always teeter on a fine line between communicating too fast and misrepresenting anything versus letting people know what's happening. And I was explaining to her in my personal situation, it was horrifying watching the planes, the helicopters over top and not knowing what was happening with our children. But the thing that kind of kept me solid was the fact that I kept getting communication messages saying, the police are here, they are looking at it, please stay tuned, we will keep in touch, do not come to the school, we're trying to keep the area clear, we will be evacuating as soon as possible. But it was just like little tidbits, just to kind of keep families up, and it does just make a difference. And now that we have such accelerated text messaging abilities, just even if it's just something to say, we are aware that there's a situation, we will let you know as soon as we know what the situation is, and things like that. So just my personal, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Harris?
Yep. Just a couple things. First, this actually, Mr. Gull, the gentleman who testified, said he was a virtual academy parent, reminded me of something that a commenter at our last board meeting said at the conclusion of our meeting. We had a very lengthy conversation around social emotional supports, trauma-informed practices inculcated throughout our schools, and all, kind of the very aspirational commitment we were making to the way we're going to make everybody feel safe, welcome, and valued. But we didn't ever talk about the virtual academy. And so I'm just wondering if, not necessarily right now, but we can get a bit of an update about how we're supporting our virtual academy students with their social emotional wellness needs, their wellness and well-being writ large, and how we're making services available to them if they need that, making sure they know what is available. So he just reminded me of that. And then I did want to comment on Ms. Eckerly. Did she leave? Ms. Eckerly, the instrumental music instructor at Wooten. And I have to say, I have had the pleasure of representing the board at the last 2 Wooten commencements, and the instrumental music program at that school is jaw-dropping. The quality, it's absolutely amazing. And if we could get some follow-up through our fine arts group about the issues she raised, because we do hear around the county frequently about a lack of the arts are essential, I believe, to student achievement in every realm. And we hear about supply issues with instruments and repair and aging infrastructure when it comes to our instruments. So if we could just follow up on her issues. And then I did, just following back on Ms. Vondrowski's comments about Magruder, I do want to emphasize the concerns that I've heard consistently from the community are and that have been re-elaborated here. One goes to the reunification process that day. It was, especially for those parents and students involved, it was a lengthy process and it felt very disorganized. And as we are doing our after action and we are looking at, where things went right and where things need to improve, I think all of us would like to know what we learned from that process that will govern any, hopefully never, but if we ever have a process where we have to, that unification has to happen again, what parents can know about how we will do that better, how we will communicate, how we will, there was concerns about students being questioned by police without notification or presence of parents when they were already quite traumatized, understandably. And if we could really be very clear with our community that we understand those issues and concerns of what we are going to do, being informed by the experience of those who were most dramatically impacted. And then that goes, I think, to also, I've heard concerns from the students in that classroom where a sequence of events in which, that permitted the shooter to come into that classroom and be in that classroom, and of course later on, as the events unfolded, was apprehended. That's a special kind of trauma that I think it sounds to me like is still, the repercussions are still there. Mm-hmm. And it needs specific focus from our professionals who know really how to deal with that kind of event. And I'm hoping that, to me, as Ms. Vondrowski has alluded, I think the asks of the community here are very, very reasonable and very, very relevant. And I hope that we can very much sooner rather than later kind of move through that process. And Ms. Wolf mentioned letting us know when. Thank you.
Ms. Wolf, if I may, I just want to reassure the board that everything that you're saying absolutely permeates my expectation and our priority. Dr. Murphy mentioned that, this follow-up, particularly around the communication, those protocols, is at the top of the priority list and with our community. And the reason it's ongoing work that we do with the community is because sometimes there's delayed trauma. We know that the supports and things that we have to do immediately when we know how students are impacted, but sometimes that impact may not show itself differently or the same or differently months later. And sometimes our parents, won't see what the impact is until months later. So I appreciate and welcome these comments because we want to continue to learn and know what the impact is because we want to be a partner in addressing that. And then taking into consideration each of these circumstances, while there are many similarities, are different. But every student who has the experience or a family who has the experience must be of value to us. And will be. So I appreciate that and want to reassure you that these are prompt and timely follow-ups that we will have in place for the interest of the relationship that we want to continue to have with our students and families. One other comment too, Ms. Harris, you brought up our testimony from
Mr. Gall.
Miss Early, actually, Eckerly. And I appreciate her and want to thank her, although she's not here, for coming forward and sharing that with us. And, we've been talking a lot about communication and what options are out there. And one came to mind as she was giving her testimony. With our MCPS Foundation, Educational Foundation, we have the Help Me Make Music campaign that actually also helps our schools to be able to get those instruments. And as she was giving that testimony, I kept thinking, that's something that we have in place. Is there more that we can do or should do to make sure we're sharing that with our schools? So I heard that loud and clear. I know we have our budget season coming up where we look at all of these priorities as well. So we will take that into consideration. And yes, Mr. Gall's testimony, we heard and appreciate his comments as well. There is one clarification I did want to make, and I want to make sure our community understands, is this. It was the state's attorney's office that we partnered with to provide that information session for our students, not the police, bless you, not the police. And so I did want to make sure we did clarify that because we have gotten a lot of feedback and we want to be very thoughtful about the sensitivity around these issues, as we also want to make sure our students have factual information about how they would be impacted in these circumstances. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that.
Thank you. Ms. Silvestri.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Ms. Rubens a question, just clarifying, make sure that we're all on the same page. You mentioned that you're still working on some tasks related to Magruder. What are those tasks?
Sure. Thank you. Dr. Murphy and I are collaborating with a variety of others to send the communication out specific to the families of the students who are in that specific classroom. And key to Dr. McKnight's point about trauma and how it presents itself, just ongoing support that's tailored to meet the needs, because things came up right away, some things came up much later, and we anticipate even with the events of BCC, the re-triggering of some of the students and families and the supports that we'll put in place there. And then certainly to continue our communication, our meetings, our plannings with the community of Magruder as we move forward.
Thank you for
Can I
that.
just say that
Go ahead,
I just really want to specify, I appreciate all of the mental health supports and things like that that we're continuing to do. We need to continue to do that. But information is comfort, and just, when they feel like they don't know and they're not being heard, it makes all of the other dynamics worse, in my opinion. So I just want to really emphasize that the sooner, the better. Thank you.
Also, every time there's an incident at another school, it probably brings it back up to mind. Additionally, the student, as I understand it, returned to school this year. So that's another factor that's probably traumatic, to start seeing the child that was injured every day. And something that we don't often think about, and I only know this because I have a grandson in elementary school, is every time they hear of an incident, they're traumatized. So I think that we need to think about, the ripple effect across our system. So thank you. Dr. Joftis, did I see your hand?
Yes, thanks, Ms. Wolf. I associate myself with all the comments. And I did want to just sort of ask Ms. Rubin, I appreciate there truly has been a lot of great work that the system has done in support of the Magruder community. I guess my biggest concern is that, we had two of the key parent leaders from that community who don't seem to be aware of that work. So I just want to, I don't know, how do we sort of square that, what is the saying, square that circle, or how do we, a lot of good work is happening, but also at least a couple of our key community leaders don't seem to be aware of that. How do we make sure that those are more apparent and well-known?
Absolutely. I think a great question. I'm not sure in reference to where some of that communication gap may be, just honestly, but I do believe that a couple of key things that we can do immediately is take what we've heard today from our constituents, go through and act on that. As we mentioned, we've already puzzled through a communication that will go next week. We will have that. We've continued to add the supports to the community, and I think you heard in our presentation, right, because it's not, we're hearing some of that from students as well, right? How do we continue to work extremely hard around making sure that the services are apparent, they're aware, and so looking at all of the modes of communication, some great ideas that were offered here today about how we can continue to communicate, and I think continuing with those parent meetings. Those community meetings have been a real vessel for us in the school system to really get the message out and to get the word out, and I think those are all things that we're extremely committed to continuing and enhancing as we go forward.
Thank you. Seeing no other lights, we will now go on to item 6. Dr. McKnight?
Thank you, President Wolf and all board members, for that very important discussion. So we'll transition, and I will ask all of the appropriate staff to come down as we begin to prepare for our presentation on the evidence of learning end of the year report and performance data report. If we could pull up the PowerPoint presentation, please, to get us started. All right, very good. So this afternoon, the team is here, and we have much been anticipating this conversation as everyone continues to ask, and what we continue to investigate is what is the evidence of learning for our students, particularly as we take into consideration the fact that their learning had been impacted for the past few years. And so we are here to have this conversation to be very astute to that so that we can respond and plan appropriately for all of our students' needs in Montgomery County Public Schools. Just this week, I was meeting with staff, and we were talking about all of our work, and we talked about the importance of always centering every single thing that we do around how are our students learning. What's happening with their learning? That is the primary reason that they are sent to us, and that is what we have to pay attention to. And we're paying attention to it from a lens of equity, because we have to make sure that every student is getting what they need in Montgomery County Public Schools. And with that said, we're also acknowledging that that does not mean we are approaching their structure from a one-size-fits-all model. There are a number, and I know I continue to say this, but I will say it, we are a school system of over 161,000 students. And we need to be able to protect the learning interests of every single one of those students. And so in a system of this size, we have to constantly look at who needs what does that look like from an equity lens, and how do we differentiate for those learning needs. And that can be some things that look much larger in our programming, and some things that look much smaller based on what the student needs are. And so I will continue to say that is how we focus our work, that is how we should focus our investments, and most importantly, we learn from our students. And so I'm excited that we're able to have this conversation today just to kick us off on that discussion. The end of the year evidence of learning data provides us with information in how we're doing in those areas focused on literacy and mathematics. If you would bring up the next slide, please. I also want to go back and constantly remind us of how this all aligns to what we say is important to us. And so this pyramid here is not one that is new to you, but I think it's important that we continue to share that the board priorities or the board meetings are aligned to what we want to accomplish in our strategic plan, which is what we've constantly said, this is what's important to us, and student learning is centered in that. And so you see our board priorities and then how our strategic plan continues to focus on those areas. You see academic excellence right there as the first indicator of what we continue to focus on for our board strategic plan. Next slide. So essentially what we're going to talk about today really is how we have been able to look at our students overall, and we've seen some things that tell us a bit more about how our students have been impacted by the pandemic and more importantly what we need to do. We're going to see some things that may highlight some general themes. We've seen some growth in literacy across the board, and we've seen some decline in math, and specifically at the secondary level. I think it was last month, I was with some of our administrative staff, and we started to talk about what some of the implications of that means and what it means at the school level and what it means at the classroom level. And I know centered in that conversation are our teachers, who are in the classroom with our learners, and we know that what they share with us about what their needs are and how we continue to support them in that journey, whether it may be related to the professional learning that they need to implement or the programs that they need, our job is to be able to listen and understand that so that we can support them in supporting their students. So I'm excited to bring this team forward to be able to share this information with you. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Addison, I believe, at this point, who will kick this presentation off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight, and good afternoon, members of the board. If we could go to the next slide, please. And so as Dr. McKnight shared and previewed, what we're going to do today is talk about how the evidence of learning framework intentionally aligns to our strategic plan. And as you see, it is aligned to our academic excellence pillar. And so as we think about our strategic plan, the objective in the strategic plan as it relates to this is improving student achievement and literacy in mathematics. And so we had two indicators in our strategic plan, and what you see on the right-hand side are our performance targets as it relates to the percent of students meeting evidence of learning and literacy in mathematics. And as we present to you today and share the data, we will let you know and the community know whether we met our strategic plan targets for the 2021-2022 school year. Next slide, please. And so we begin with a refresher of the evidence of learning framework, as we know that there are two ways that we examine data for students in literacy and mathematics. First is transition, so that's our mid-year check. We brought you our transition data back in April and showed how were our students in grades 3, 6, and 9 doing as they transition from their readiness grade levels, which are grades 2, 5, 8, and 11. And grades 2, 5, 8, and 11 are our readiness grade levels, and that's the data that we bring to you today in terms of how students performed at the end of the school year. And as we think about our evidence of learning framework, we have three categories of data that we look at that have separate measures. The first is classroom data, the data from our teachers that come from report card grades. Next, we look at district measures, which are district assessments aligned to the curriculum. And then we also have external measures, which is that external check for how students are doing. So those include assessments that we do not develop as a district, but we think is important to look at kind of our comparison to the nation and other districts when possible. And so important to remember that our evidence of learning framework employs a multiple measures approach. We look across those categories, classroom, district, and external, and we also want multiple measures within those categories. Next slide, please. And so when we talk about evidence of learning or whether or not students met evidence of learning, we're talking about evidence of learning attainment. And so that means the extent to which a student meets one measure within at least two of those categories. So did they meet a classroom and a district measure, a district and an external measure, or a classroom and an external measure? And in each of those areas, we have explicit standards and expectations that are shared with schools and principals and teachers around the expectations. So for example, with the classroom measures, it might be an expectation of earning a C or higher in a specific course. District measures, we do standard setting, and so we identify a percentage that we want students to meet in that. And then for our external measures, we also align either to the state expectation or to some assessment that we've done to align what, for example, the MAP assessment equivalent would be for a state assessment. Next slide, please. And so we will begin with mathematics. And so on this slide, you see the readiness grade levels down the left-hand side. Across the top, you see each of those three categories that I just described: classroom, district, and external. And then you have an additional column that says overall EOL, which is evidence of learning attainment. And under each of those columns is the percent of students who met each of those categories, as well as the percent of students who met evidence of learning attainment or overall EOL. And on the far right-hand side is the percent of our students receiving services as it relates to their evidence of learning attainment. And so for this slide, I'm going to focus on the overall EOL section. And so you'll see at grade 2, 75.1% of grade 2 students met evidence of learning attainment or overall EOL. For grade 5, 53.7% met evidence of learning attainment. Grade 8, 46.3%. And grade 11, 60.5%. And as we look at our students receiving services, we notice that the majority of our students receiving services in grades 5, 8, and 11 had lower percentages of meeting overall evidence of learning attainment in mathematics. Next slide, please. Here we show grade 2 breakdown looking at disaggregated results for our student groups. And what you will notice across the top is that we have our student groups with farms and non-farms. Again, down the left-hand side are the different categories: classroom, district, external. And then that final row is the overall, which is the extent to which students met evidence of learning attainment. And if you look across the slides, you will notice that the majority of our students are meeting evidence of learning attainment, with lower percentages of our students who are identified as all other student groups, Black or African American or Hispanic Latino, receiving farms services. Next slide, please. On this slide, we are showing you a comparison from the last time we brought end-of-year evidence of learning data, which was September 21st, 2021. And the gray dot shows the 2021 results, and the blue dot shows the 2022 results. And what you will notice here is that we see an increase for all of our student groups, as well as our students receiving services, compared to last year when we looked at grade 2 evidence of learning. So we had marked progress for our grade 2 students across these 2 years. Next slide, please. Next, we transition to grade 5 results. What you will notice here is as we look at our district external measures, we see lower percentages of students meeting the measures or expectations in those categories. And when we look at our overall evidence of learning attainment, we notice that our non-farms students who are Hispanic Latino and our farms students, white, all other student groups, Black or African American, and Hispanic Latino students had lower percentages of students meeting evidence of learning attainment. Next slide, please. Again, we show a comparison to the end of the school year for 2021 compared to the end of this most recent school year. And when we look at the left-hand side of the slide, we notice that almost all student groups showed an increase in the percent of students meeting evidence of learning attainment, with a slight decrease for our students receiving special education services. And as we look at our racial ethnic groups, which are on the right-hand side, we see increases for almost all student groups, except for our students who are Asian with a slight decrease, as well as our all other student groups, which includes American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and all other Pacific Islanders. Next slide, please. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Logan, who will share reflections and next steps.
Thank you, Dr. Addison. Good afternoon, President Wolf, Dr. McKnight, and members of the board. I'm Keisha Logan, Director of Pre-K-12 Curriculum in the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs. It's an honor to be here with you today to talk about how the evidence of learning data will continue to inform our work in OSIP as we work to support the strategic plan as well as our priority focus on equitable teaching and learning for all students. Today, Ms. Hazel and I are here to remind you of the instructional areas of focus for both literacy and mathematics, as well as talk about some key factors that we can attribute to either gains or decline that we see in the data, and talk about our plan for next steps around professional learning, data collection and analysis and response. So as you know, we work very closely with our colleagues in the Office of School Support and Well-Being. So today you will also hear us talking about the important role that the School Improvement Plan plays in supporting our schools, supporting our teachers and leaders, and again, on that path to academic excellence. The intent is for us to align the supports that are happening on the ground in the schools and how we collaborate to support schools as they implement those school improvement plans and the goals that they have for their instructional programs. So on the screen here, you see these elements highlighted for elementary mathematics. The first instructional area of focus that I'll highlight today is to maintain a focus on the major work of the grade. When we talk about the major work of the grade, we're talking about that content or those skills that are most essential and necessary for students in order to get to success in Algebra 1. And so it's really important that this is an instructional focus and continues to be included in our plan for professional learning so that our teachers are well aware of what that content and those standards are. For example, here's a math example, preliminary understanding of place value in kindergarten and first grade leads to effective work with all 4 operations later in elementary school. When these understandings are solid for our students, students can then build their understanding on fractions and decimals. In addition, at the middle school level, it continues to build. This will lead to the study of ratios and proportions. So each step of the way, our teachers must understand that major work of the grade in order to understand when students demonstrate proficiency and can move on to the next content area. While elementary math is not yet seeing the type of progress that we want to see for all students, we do want to highlight some gains, particularly for our Hispanic, Latino students, our emergent multilingual learners, as well as our students receiving FARMs in grades 2 and 5. And this data and these gains that we're seeing, we do attribute to our focus on the major work of the grade from last year, which we are continuing this year. Another instructional area of focus for elementary math is to support our teachers with developing that deep content knowledge on math concepts and the standards. The better teachers understand the content and the standards, the better they are able to be nimble and to really adjust instruction as necessary to meet the needs of students as it's presented in the data. So a typical day in a math classroom looks very different today than I know it was for me when I was learning mathematics, because what teachers are doing in the classroom with our students is really helping to facilitate that deep understanding and reasoning at a conceptual level, and then coming in after and reinforcing that procedural knowledge. So for this reason, an intense focus must continue to be available to our teachers to help them deepen that understanding, to be able to make those adjustments quickly during instruction. We have one example that we provide to our teachers to assist with this. Our elementary math team has created an asynchronous module that teachers can access at their own pace, and this really helps them in their planning to be able to break down the standard, identify the standard, break it down, and then plan instruction accordingly after they've engaged in that deep curriculum study. And so that's just one example of how we're helping our teachers break down that content. It's really important for elementary math instruction as we're planning how to do the math with our students rather than showing our students how to do the math. That makes sense. The key factors that you see on this slide cite 3 commitments that we, again, contribute to the data that's been shared today, and all 3 reflect the fact that work begun in prior years, the past 3 years, as we've been engaging with the new curriculum with Eureka Math. We've been implementing that curriculum, but the work we're doing to help our teachers and support our teachers is unfinished. And we're committed to the instructional approaches of the curriculum, and we acknowledge that there certainly is more work to be done with curriculum implementation and professional learning. Increasing teacher proficiency in using the tools that are available in the curriculum, for example, is just one example of where we're going to focus this year, making sure that every thing that the curriculum offers to support our teachers are aware of and understand how to use that in their planning, as well as more connections to how social-emotional learning can be infused in the math block. So last year, we'll continue to do this year, as part of the pacing guides that we provide to teachers, our math team included opportunities within the math block where social emotional learning could be infused, time for building relationships and really building that safe environment for students to engage in mathematics while they're also learning math. And that will continue this year as well. So as for next steps, I know Dr. Joftis and other members of the board have continually asked us how we know that our plan that we're putting in place for professional learning and data analysis, how do we know it's really impacting students and reaching teachers in the classroom? This is a major area of focus for our team this year, and so we're providing, to ensure that we're providing our students what they need. So the next steps for us in central office include a focus on professional learning, frequent review of data and appropriate response as needed, and strategically providing support to schools. With help, we'll be able to do just that. The more information we have about what's working, the better we're able to elevate as well excellent practices happening across the district, putting schools in touch with each other to share those resources and best practices, and being able to then strategically use data to provide supports for schools that may need additional help. Some explicit areas that we'll be closely following this year include effective implementation of the components of the Eureka Math block. What does that look like, and how are teachers planning for it? Along with that, teacher curriculum study and planning for lessons as well. With us being a part of those planning sessions, we'll be able to support that work. And regular use of Eureka Math tools, as I mentioned before. In addition to that, we'll also be monitoring the assessments. We'll be monitoring progress on district assessments as well as our external assessments. Our elementary math team, which consists of 1 supervisor and 3 content specialists, are going to work collaboratively with our colleagues in special education, English language development, and school support and well-being to be able to accomplish this work for all of our schools. And so together we'll strengthen mathematics by, as you heard, ensuring effective use of curriculum tools. So on the screen, under Next Steps, you see we talk about the use of Eureka Math Equip. And if you recall, back in the spring, we highlighted Judith Resnick Elementary School. They were really one of the first schools to use that curriculum resource, which is a pre-diagnostic tool within the curriculum that we've purchased. It allows teachers to see, while planning for a unit or a lesson, they're able to assess what kind of knowledge students bring with them to that lesson, and then they can plan adjustments accordingly on the front end. And so we really want to see all of our schools using that, and I'm really pleased to share already this year, 98 elementary schools have used this tool to plan appropriately, and so we're able to monitor and really, again, focus our instructional support to those schools who haven't yet accessed to help them break down those barriers or provide professional learning. Another important part of our plan is providing more strategic support to schools, as you just heard me reference for Equip, one of our tools with Eureka Math. We're also going to be looking at data, again, in collaboration with our colleagues in central office, working side by side with schools to go in and take a look at instruction, talk about the implications that we're seeing in the data, as well as some next steps, and just really assist schools with implementation of their school improvement plan. So far already this year, in just the first week of school, our elementary math team have been in to visit more than 36 schools. I know it's more than that from when they gave me this number, but we're working every day to go in and support schools with what they need. And of course, professional learning. So I've been kind of talking about the different areas of focus for professional learning this year. Through professional learning for all schools, we're going to continue to build capacity for our leaders, for our teachers in the classroom. And an example we have coming up in early October, what we call the Instructional Leadership Forum, is going to be centered for our elementary leaders, centered on math instruction. We're going to be providing principals and other leaders examples of what the Eureka Math block should look like and sound like, so that they are aware when they're going in and visiting instruction and listening into planning, as well as some resources from Eureka Math as far as an implementation tool that they can also use to help in this process. So that's just one example of the way that we want to partner with our schools as we provide professional learning. And finally, we want to continue to elevate the voices of our teachers and our teacher leaders. So after all of these professional learning sessions, we always collect feedback, input. We ask our participants to share how they're going to apply the information that was gained from the professional learning that they just engaged with, and we use that information to follow up with schools, to support schools, and to inform the work professional learning that we provide in turn. And so that voice is extremely important in just helping us to make shifts and adjustment throughout the year as well. It really will take a collaborative effort with Central Services in partnership with schools for successful implementation of this plan, which will lead to improved student outcomes. And I'd now like to turn things back over to Dr. Addison.
Thank you. Next slide, please. We now transition to looking at mathematics results at the secondary level, so we will begin with grade 8. And what you will notice on this slide is as we look at our district measures, our external measures, and then the overall evidence of learning attainment, we have more red. So we see that lower percentages of students were meeting the district measure, and in some student groups, we have lower percentages meeting the external measure. And so if we remember, evidence of learning attainment is meeting 2 out of the 3 measures, then we should expect that if we have lower percentages for 2 measures, district and external, we can see the lower measures of overall evidence of learning attainment. And so as we look at those student groups, we see that our African American and Hispanic Latino students not receiving free and reduced price meal system services have lower percentages of meeting, as well as our farms groups, that far right end. So that's white, all other student groups, Black or African American students, as well as Hispanic Latino students. Next slide, please. Again, here we compare the results from the end of the school year in 2021 to the end of this most recent school year. And what you will notice is across all services and all students on the left-hand side, as well as for all racial ethnic groups, that we see lower percentages of students meeting our end of year evidence of learning expectations compared to last school year. Next slide, please. We transition now to grade 11, looking at results by our student groups. What you will notice here, again, we have some percentages of students meeting evidence of learning attainment well. Our non-farms Asian, white, and all other student groups have high percentages of students meeting evidence of learning attainment. When we look at our Black or African American, Hispanic, Latino, and Asian students receiving farms, and the Black or African American and Hispanic, Latino are groups not receiving farm services, we have between 50 and 74% of those students meeting overall evidence of learning attainment. And then as we look at the overall evidence of learning attainment for our students receiving farms, that is our white, our all other student groups, Black or African American and Hispanic Latino, we see lower percentages of those student groups meeting evidence of learning attainment. Next slide, please. Again, we compare our grade 11 results from the end of the school year in 2021 to our grade 11 results to the end of the 2022 school year. And what you'll see is the majority of our student groups had lower percentages of meeting. When we look at grade 11, our students receiving special education services had a slight increase of 1.6 percentage points compared to last school year. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see our 2 or more student group had a slight increase of 0.3 percentage points. I will now turn it back over to Dr. Logan to share more reflections and next steps.
Thank you, Dr. Addison. So I'd like to first begin by acknowledging that while we use this data as a flashlight to illuminate opportunities for change and for progress, the data also presents cause for concern, and as well as an urgency, right? A sense of urgency and the need for us and our work to be strategic and timely, as well as monitored for effectiveness. We must know that there needs to be a more intensive approach to how we are meeting the needs of our students for secondary mathematics. And today I'm going to outline some very specific and evidence-based actions that we will be taking to improve student outcomes for secondary math. As we look to a full year of academic learning for students, one instructional area of focus for secondary mathematics is teachers developing deep content knowledge and strengthening their teaching practices in alignment with the standards, the grade level standards. And this certainly mirrors one of our instructional areas of focus that you just heard me speak about for elementary. I think it's important at this time to take a moment and review where we've been, bringing us to where we are right now. And while you hear this emphasis on strengthening content knowledge and alignment to grade level standards. So just provide a brief curriculum timeline. So back in 2017 and 2018, that's when Montgomery County Public Schools elicited Johns Hopkins University to conduct a curriculum review. And at that time, it was found by this report that our curriculum that was being implemented, which was Curriculum 2.0, needed to be better aligned or a stronger alignment to the Maryland College and Career Ready standards. With that information, in 2018 and 2019, we purchased new curricula. For math, that was Eureka Math, and for secondary, Illustrative Mathematics for grades 6, 7, and 8, and Algebra 1. And so in the summer of 2019, we began with our professional learning around curriculum implementation. In 2019 and 2020 was our first year of implementation for about a third of our secondary schools with Illustrative Math. And some of our high schools also began to pilot Algebra 1 as well. And again, teachers are becoming familiar with the curriculum, the unique approach and emphasis on conceptual learning that the curriculum asked teachers to plan for, and we were continuing with our initial implementation. And then, of course, the pandemic hit in 2020. And in 2021, virtual instruction. So in addition to more schools implementing the curriculum, teachers were pivoting and teachers were trying to grasp how to best provide virtual instruction to engage our students. And so that continued all while we were implementing the curriculum as well. Last school year, with our return to in-person instruction, we did continue to see some disruptions with COVID, and we were still adjusting the curriculum to account for missed instruction. And that leads us to where we are today with our return to equitable teaching and learning as our priority focus. And so on average, curriculum implementation in the most typical circumstances requires 3 to 5 years in order for our teachers to become familiar with that curriculum study and the asks of the curriculum. The professional learning we've provided over the past 3 years has centered on initial implementation, and we are now shifting and moving forward with not just curriculum implementation. I'm sorry, yes, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Not just curriculum implementation, but how. How should this curriculum be implemented? How are teachers using the tools and resources in professional learning communities as they plan to meet the needs of all of our students? So from the what of the curriculum to the how. And here's an example. So in grade 7, we teach two-step equations to our students, such as 2x plus 3 equals 11. Having students solve an equation like this without any context only scratches the surface of the grade level standard. What our curriculum asks teachers to do in order for students to really master the depth of that standard is not just have students solve that equation, but it's asking them to create and solve that equation. Not just using whole numbers, but also fractions and decimals and negatives. And so that is why that emphasis on that deep content knowledge and alignment to standard is so important and a focus in our professional learning. MSDE has also created performance level descriptors to assist teachers, outlining what students must know and show at every grade level with the standards to help guide with this learning as well. With this timeline review, you can see that there are a few key factors that can contribute to the data that was shared today. Our new curriculum is a key factor, as I shared. Our new curriculum really, at its core, centers on problem solving and critical thinking. And it's a different approach for some of our teachers with teaching mathematics. When the illustrative math curriculum is taught as written, students engage in real-world problems, and they're applying their knowledge to create solutions to those problems. So this builds their conceptual understanding simultaneously while also strengthening their procedural knowledge. This approach, again, requires that deep knowledge of the standards so that teachers can shift to be able to make adjustments where necessary within their instruction. In addition, in the past 2 years, we've had to modify our pacing guides to prioritize some of the essential standards for each grade level and to address missed instruction, which unfortunately did not align with the externally created assessments that we had for our illustrative mathematics curriculum. So this year, we have aligned the pacing calendar and the assessments. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We have amazing, hardworking mathematics teachers, and we know that in math, the content students learn builds and continually connects to new learning. So our teachers have to quickly identify when there is a need in the data that they're collecting daily to shift and adapt instruction accordingly. And so that's why we have our focus, those areas of focus for professional learning this year to support teachers with that process. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there are several next steps that we believe will lead to improved academic success for our students in secondary mathematics. First and foremost, we've collaborated with our colleagues in the Office of Strategic Initiatives to create new assessments that align to our pacing guides and are more accessible for our students. The new items were drawn from key data systems within the Performance Matters platform, ensuring that the questions are statistically reliable and valid. In addition, since it is in Performance Matters, we will have access at the central level, but as well as teachers will have access to that data to be able to look for patterns and trends across the district or at the school level across the classrooms in the schools to quickly make instructional changes as necessary for a particular course. We'll also engage our math leaders so that they are able to, they're equipped with the knowledge to be able to manipulate and access Performance Matters, and we started that work again this summer when we met with our leaders. Next, we know that in order to see progress for students, the professional learning that we provide must be strategic and focused. So we're going to use data to differentiate the supports that we provide to schools. This would include side-by-side school-based support with collaborative planning, for example, instructional visits, and data discussions and response. For example, in our monthly math leader meetings, we're engaging in discussions and professional learning about what equitable teaching and learning looks like and sounds like in the classrooms. At this week, actually just yesterday, was the meeting with our math leaders. They provided feedback on instructional look-fors aligned with equitable teaching and learning. So what should be observable in every secondary mathematics classroom to show that we are aligned to curriculum and we're also aligned to our focus on equitable teaching and learning? This would include things like hearing students engaging in discourse with each other, making sense of problems and critiquing the reasoning of others, for example. And so these look-fors will also be made available to our colleagues in central office and to our leaders in the school so that we're all sort of speaking the same language and are aware of what we expect to see in the classroom to ensure there is alignment to the standards. And the final essential component we want to elevate for you today is the process of assessing the impact of these supports throughout the year. So this will be done through evaluating the professional learning that we provide, reviewing formative data, as well as engaging in critical dialogue about what's working and what shifts need to be made as we're monitoring that data throughout the school year. Next slide, please. Again, everything that I've talked about today involves a multi-step shared partnership between central services and schools. In collaboration with our colleagues, whether it be being a part of teacher planning, developing professional learning that's at the school level or at the district level, or monitoring progress through the data. Our next steps are aligned to school improvement planning. and the math professional learning. So we ask our teachers to use the data to drive instruction. We'll work with our English language development colleagues as well as our colleagues in special education to ensure all students' needs are being met. With these strategic and intentional steps, our goal is success on the new standards-aligned district assessments, as well as improved student performance through the evidence of learning framework. Next slide. So again, while we did not meet our strategic plan performance target for mathematics, we are confident in the plan that's being shared here today and that we are really emphasizing the urgent need to be more strategic and providing those timely supports, coupled with our focus on equitable instructional practices. I think it's also important to note that while today I focused on the plan for excellent first instruction, all of our schools also have available to them funds to be able to provide very robust opportunities for students to engage in additional support through tutoring, whether it be before school, after school, and so that is also very much a part of how we're going to be able to get students what they need as well. Next slide. So in summary, the elementary and secondary math teams work very closely together to create a cohesive and comprehensive experience for our students in math. The work that I outlined today is aligned with equitable mathematics instruction, and this means providing all students pursuing grade level outcomes with access to grade level standards. And this is a major tenet of equitable instruction. Our commitment to focus on grade level standards means we must provide our teachers with the tools that they need to be able to make that happen for our students in the classroom. When teachers have a firm grasp on that content and those standards and the curriculum, they know the skills that require more time within the curriculum and can plan accordingly. And we want our students to have a strong mathematics foundation that's centered on grade level instruction, that's engaging, affirming, and meaningful. For this to happen, we have to work together and in partnership with our schools. Next slide, please. I'll now turn it over to you, President Wolf, and the board for discussion.
Thank you. That's a lot of information, and I really appreciate it. I have just a couple of things I want to try to understand, and it could be my lack of understanding about what's on here, but I'm going to go back to slide. Well, we can go to 7, we could go to 8. Let's go to slide number 8. I'm just trying to understand the classroom, the numbers are extremely high, but the district assessment is nowhere near that. So aren't we assessing what they're teaching in the classroom? Is there some disconnect there somewhere? Because it looks as though the external is higher than the district. So I guess I'm missing the alignment somewhere. Can you talk a little bit about that and why the numbers would look like this?
Is that the right slide? No, it's not.
Well, it's evident on all of them almost to me, so it doesn't matter which one you pick. It looks like the numbers are always very high for the classroom, even higher than the external is always higher than the district, so I'm missing the alignment somewhere. Can you talk to me about why I'm seeing this?
Sure. I think the first thing to understand is as we think about the evidence of learning framework, the intent is to kind of see similarities across the different measures. So when we think about the classroom measure, the district measure, and the external measure, ideally, we want to see a student performing similarly across them. And when we see those differences, as you're pointing out, it allows us to raise questions and ask what is going on. And so one thing we have to keep in mind is as we think about the classroom measure is that from the teacher, what the teacher sees the student performing in the classroom day to day. Our district measures, and I'll defer to my curriculum colleagues to kind of speak clearly more on that, but our district measures are those required measures that are based on a certain assessment at a point in time during the school year. So while a teacher may be administering multiple assessments, you have formative assessments, you have summative assessments. In our evidence of learning framework, we have certain assessments that we are identifying that we want to use as that checkpoint for students. And so when we summarize that data, that's why you see that. And then our external measures, for example, our MAP assessment, is that additional check. We can check against ourselves, we can check against other districts, and one of the things that we know about the MAP assessment is that it is curriculum agnostic, meaning it doesn't matter what curriculum you're using because it's Common Core state assessment aligned, and that's what we want to see. And so in some instances, and we've seen this isn't our first time, but we've seen this for a while now where we see in some instances students do perform better on our external measure. I'll defer to you all to talk about kind of some of what you've noticed and as it relates to the district assessments around this too.
Well, I'll just tell you the reason I asked, because, you know, we always get comments about grade inflation. And so if I were to look at this and I'm on the outside looking at it, that's what this looks like to me. So that's why I'm trying to understand what I'm seeing between all of these high classroom numbers and what I'm seeing between the district numbers, and the external, it seems to me, would be pretty important too.
I'll just add on to what Dr. Addison shared, just something else to note with that classroom measure. You know, teachers do have the opportunity within the course of the quarter to reteach and reassess. And so when you see that classroom grade, it's the teacher being able to work with students and see them attain understanding of a particular standard over time, and the grade will reflect that. As Dr. Addison said, the grade on the district assessment is one moment at a time, as well as on the external assessment. So just something else to consider as we think about the differences between those measures.
Ms. Harris, you want to?
Yeah, just following up on Ms. Wolf's point, because I did pick up on that as well. And one of the things I've heard from teachers when we're talking about the district assessments, because the thing that struck me in looking at your data and the descriptors that you provided were that the district assessments were aligned to the curriculum.
Yeah, that's what
And so what I've heard from some teachers, though, is that some of these district assessments are programmed in the year at specific times, and given the students in front of them and their progress and giving the learning disruption that they're trying to also address, they might not be there by the time that assessment is required. So is that part of what we're seeing here, or is that not at all reflective of what we might be seeing here?
I think that's certainly a part of what we're seeing here, especially given where we were with teachers seeing students coming with missed instruction. And so that is certainly something that now that we're moving to having a newly aligned assessments that will allow for us to work within our pacing calendars and really provide that alignment. We didn't have that before, and so we're going to have that moving forward at the secondary level, and that will help with that. But certainly, there's always the need for more time. As our students come to us with a multitude of needs, and what we're trying to do through our professional learning is help our teachers to understand how to provide that assistance to students who need the extra support while still moving forward. It's not something easy that we're asking teachers to do. And so we are working very closely with our teachers to be able to do that, but certainly the newly aligned assessments will help.
Yeah, thank you. And a question you mentioned, there's, I probably get this wrong, a leadership forum in early October, and the focus is going to be math instruction. And just wondering, and all of the professional development that's happening around the new curriculum, and you said for the first couple of years it was focused on implementation, and now it's kind of moving on to the next phase. How much of the professional development is driven or partly driven by what teachers in the classroom tell you is happening in the classroom and what they say they need and want to be able to deliver more powerful instruction? And how much of it is sort of just kind of part of the Eureka, I can't remember, the Illustrative Math program?
So at the initial phases of implementation, it certainly was more about, here is Illustrative Math, here's what you need to know in order to implement this curriculum. And we are now moving, we've always used the teacher voice, and I highlighted that because it is so important. we have to be able to balance both, because while we have to ensure that teachers understand everything that is available to them as part of the curriculum, they know how to engage in that curriculum study, they understand where the curriculum is going, right, from a longitudinal perspective. We also need to hear about what's happening on the ground in the classrooms. That voice is so important. And so they're both equally important. That's why we are elevating, not only in professional learning, but when we're in schools, just asking, as we walk into classrooms, asking students as well what their experience is like. We have to use both of those to inform the professional learning that we're providing.
Yeah.
We see them as equally important.
Yeah, thank you. So the last thing I'll say is, I mean, aspirationally, the curriculum sounds amazing because it's focusing on the things that we know are essential. Problem solving, critical thinking, and preparing our students to truly apply these concepts to real world situations and problems. Now it is, how do we achieve that and also make it fun and engaging in the classroom and see that students see, that like math explains everything, and here's how you measure and how you master that. So anyway, yeah, thank you.
Dr. Joftis.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Yeah, thank you for that, Lynn. Ms. Harris, I completely agree that turning it into the joy of and amazement of what math can do is always the tricky part. I want to thank Dr. Logan and Dr. Addison both for a really fantastic presentation, very comprehensive and thoughtful, and very transparent. I appreciate the some of the gains that we're showing in early elementary, and I'm obviously as distressed as you are about some of the declines at the secondary level. I want to go back. I have 2 points, I guess. The first one is just to comment on what's been discussed a little bit about the difference between the classroom and the district. This is a very common discrepancy that you see in districts. And one thing that I think we need to be careful about is that there's not a misunderstanding among our educators about what the level of expectation is, because normally when you see that the classroom level is roughly has twice the percentage of students being successful as the district measure, it means that our expectations are somewhat out of alignment. And I know you understand this, and you spoke to it really nicely about finding that balance between helping teachers and central administrators and principals and coaches sort of walk that tightrope of reteaching, but also making sure that we move ahead, because we also know that kids need to be continued to be presented with on grade level material, and if we keep reteaching things, they're not going to progress. So I totally understand that balance, and I appreciate that you're sort of wrestling with that tension. The second point I wanted to make, and this is maybe more of a broader question, is so you all know better than I do that really, really well-intended curriculum reforms across history, across school districts, across the country have absolutely failed. And it's more typical than not. And I think what improvement science tells us is that a lot of that failure comes not from the fact that the curriculum isn't really excellent if taught with fidelity. It's not the fact that teachers and students and principals and administrators all don't have capacity and the best intentions. The problem is really the way we think about the change process. And Dr. Logan, I appreciate the shout out when you were referring to this, and I know you had to move quickly through it, but I just can't emphasize enough that if we're going to be successful in doing this, which we must be, that we've got to be extremely clear about what our indicators of improvement are, even before we start seeing formative assessment data, right? So you mentioned some of the look-fors. And we have to create this virtual continuous improvement cycle that I know you all have been wrestling with, but I'm still not quite seeing it all the way closed, I guess, is how do we create that continuous feedback loop, not to be punitive, not to be evaluative of teachers or principals or others, but so that we know that we're getting the skills, we're implementing the things that we believe will ultimately result in the improvement and enjoyment of mathematics. We've had the same conversation around early literacy, structured literacy. The same conversation we need to have here is, what is that really tight feedback loop where we're continuously observing each other, we're giving each other feedback, we're doing that lesson study that I think you referred to, so that we're understanding what all the little moves that are making that make the difference. And that's why school systems in general, in my view, and I think it's backed up by a lot of research, aren't typically successful at these big curriculum reforms. And what we have to pay just so much attention to as we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic. And I'll just stop there. But thank you for the work that you're doing. But let's keep focused on that sort of continuous feedback and continuous improvement loop. Thank you.
Ms. Mandrowski.
Yeah, thank you. I too want to thank you all for the presentation and the transparency. I mean, obviously, we all find it very distressing when we see reds and when we see declines in numbers. And I appreciate the fact that you're trying to be very thoughtful in terms of actions to be taken to make improvements. Similarly, like, I will associate myself with the comments of my two colleagues here, and kind of along those lines, I'm always concerned about our sense of urgency on this, and, making sure that, well, you said you saw a lot of the teachers are even assessing things daily, weekly, but I'm curious as to what this looks like in practice, essentially. So if you are a school that has a red, I think those are hexagons, and the next kind of assessment, it's still red. What does that look like in terms of supporting? If we're putting all of these things into place, and the other thing I will say is you made a comment about it takes 3 to 5 years for any curriculum to really kind of. So I would hope it wouldn't be changing the curriculum again. But tell me what that looks like in a classroom. I'm assuming we're breaking these all down, not just by overall, but by school and by classroom inside the schools and all of that. And how do we support if there is a school that's not making the gains that we are hoping for as quickly as we need them to be?
Sure, thank you so much for that question. It really does speak to how much I talked about the need for collaboration with our colleagues. And so the needs of each individual school can look very different. And so through the data, through conversations and work with our colleagues in school support and well-being, through talking to principals about where we are with our school improvement planning, we're able to tailor the support that we provide based on those needs. And that could look, depending on what the school needs, like us meeting with principals to talk about a plan of action, working directly with a grade level team if that's what's needed, for example, to engage, could be weekly, in the curriculum study and being a part of their planning. And then following that up by being in classrooms and seeing that happening in action. And it could be that we're going with an administrator or with a colleague from special education, depending on what the need is, as we're conducting those look-fors in the classroom, providing feedback to teachers, to leaders about what are the next steps. And then as we continue, and that has to be, it's not going to happen very quickly, over a period of time and those kinds of supports, then we're looking for the gains and we're starting that cycle all over again. Okay, so we've provided this focused curriculum study and support with planning. We've seen it happening in action. We've taken data from those lessons and helped teachers analyze it to think about next steps. and just kind of grinding and continuing with the support till we're able to see what's working and what those gains are. And it's about pivoting, and it's about being there side by side to be able to support the schools on what their individual needs are. And so that starts for us at a very high level view of looking at the data and talking to schools and working with our colleagues to identify those schools that need that more intensive support. But it really is about hearing from the teachers, hearing from the principals at those schools, and tailoring our support to meet their needs.
I appreciate that. Just going to give a quick shout. I can't remember his name, and I'm disappointed to say, but Rochelle Rubin and I took a lovely tour of Odessa Shannon, and I saw an amazing math teacher that the kids were just so engaged, and everyone seemed to know what they were doing and could explain to me what they were doing when I didn't really understand it. And I found that really impressive. So I know how hard everybody's working, but as we're coming up on budget season and stuff, and we're looking at putting our money, in our efforts to make the biggest impact possible, I'm also wondering how we evaluate I don't want to none of us wants to put money into something that isn't working, or we're not seeing improvements. So just being cognizant of evaluating what resources we are using and whether or not it's having an effect, and whether or not we need to do something different as a board, as our superintendent, and because that's where we can help with that. So I appreciate this update, and the more information that we can get, obviously the better it is for our decision-making processes as we go forward. So thank you.
I just thought of one thing while everyone has been talking about this. Can you break this data down by school? Because I think that would be more helpful to me to see which schools really need more support than others. Because we had a presentation, I believe it was by Oakland Terrace, was it? And they showed great improvement. So I know that this data isn't giving us the full picture, so I would like to get it sent to me broken down by school, if you could do that.
Even if it didn't have the name of the school, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, however you
Just we
could
can
provide
see.
it, but I'm sure that this data, it masks certain things that I might need to know, but I would like it broken down by school. Thank you.
Yes, we can provide that for you.
Thank you. Mr. Kim, I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you again for the presentation. To that point, actually, of course, that data would be important to see by school, and I do recognize that it seems like a lot of those next steps focus on differentiating the needs of each school. But while we have that data broken down, how can we take that deliberate, strategic, differentiating the needs approach to address the significant disparities that lie between the success of non-farm students and farm students, between Asian and white students, and Black or African American or Hispanic and Latino students? Because yes, I'm sure that those disparities will be present by school to school, and we can see that data, and thus the need to differentiate the needs by those schools is critical. But seeing the disparities that lie in the data we have here, it to me seems equally critical to differentiate needs based on that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kim. That is the work. As we talk about differentiating supports for schools, that's how deeply we are analyzing the data with those individual schools. We always disaggregate and look at the performance across all of the different racial groups, students who are receiving services as well, to be able to see where those disparities are by school. And oftentimes, when they're creating their school improvement goals, it is looking at those specific groups and monitoring the progress. And so that's a part of the cycle that I talked about, and thank you so much for calling that out. It's so important.
If I may, President Wolf, I just want to add one component onto that. I'm looking over to my right at Ms. Sharon, because I know we're going to be talking about the anti-racist audit. And a component of that was to really be able to look at how do we emphasize implementation of a lot of our learning, whether it may be curriculum instruction, how we look at students and acknowledge some of the gaps that have existed there. What are the things in the process of our work talked about today and much other work that either impedes or promotes progress for specific groups of students. Going back to exactly what Ms. Logan just said, that is the root of what we have to accomplish, closing gaps, making sure all students can be successful. So I continue to emphasize that learning component of that really is a big part of what we have to continue to evaluate and look at to address exactly what you're saying. And I've said this before, we'll say it again, these gaps have been here systemically, probably before any of us were sitting here. I think Dr. Jofta says it's the biggest sin of the nation when we really look at what happened in our infrastructure that created those gaps that we're still talking about today that we have to address. The most troubling part of that is because it existed for so long, we want to fix it urgently, but know that it's something we can't fix overnight, but we have got to continue to push ourselves to say, why are we doing that? Even when we, why are these numbers looking the same and why these gaps continue to persist for students? And I'll go back to what I said earlier at the beginning of this conversation. We have to know the students, know what's going on with their learning needs to be able to address that specifically. In some places, we're providing more intensive support for specific things, and we have to acknowledge that from a lens of equity. It's a big part of what we have to address as a school system. So I look forward to us not just having this type of conversation in this space of when we're talking about curriculum instruction, but in the overall big picture of how do we become that anti-racist school system that works on constantly eliminating those gaps for our students.
Thank you for that, Dr. McKnight. I'm going to come back to you, but I still want the data by school because I think that especially as we go into budget season, we have a lot of math staff that we've been working with and employing, and I just need to see the return on investment. As Ms. Smandrowski often points out, it's not clear to me the alignment between what they're doing, the success of the students, and what we're spending on it. So I need that data. Okay, Mr. Kim.
I just wanted to appreciate those remarks. As Dr. McKnight said, these systemic problems do require systematic change. And I think what we're going to talk about the next meeting, the anti-racist audit, really embodies that work. It is not enough to introduce these incremental measures to make marginal improvements. It does take being actively anti-racist to combat these ultimately 200-year-old injustices and shortcomings of the school system. So thank you.
Absolutely, Mr. Kim. And just to hone this point in even more, so when we look at it school by school, what are we going to do?
Exactly.
Because this is when, but for all of us, this is when it becomes very uncomfortable.
Exactly.
That's what matters.
It becomes very uncomfortable. It becomes things that we have to highlight and work through with one another. And that's when the work, does take a lot of courage, a lot of support, a lot of emphasizing from all of us. And so I just elevate that because this is why we're here. We all know it's important. And so when we come and continue to look at the data and talk about the presentations and talk about what we're going to do, the context doesn't separate itself at all. So and when we talk about that school, and one other thing I want to elevate, and we will come back and talk about this, but when we started prior to the pandemic, and we're right back here talking about the importance of the equity accountability model. If you remember from the ERS, a purpose of it was to be able to tell the story of every single school. For what reason? So that we could be able to provide that support in more of an intentional way. And most importantly, empower our schools to see the data in that way so that they could be very responsive to it in real time and for us to give them that support. So that's the other part of, why elevate that equity accountability model, because it came back to us building the model to be just that intentional so that, when we look at the schools, when we ask the question, what is it like at schools, it's not an afterthought in the conglomerate of information that we're looking at.
Ms. Silvestri.
Thank you. I wanted to continue on the theme on return on investment. When we began our reopening work, we talked about the 2.5-year plan. And we, if I remember correctly, our interventions were professional development, tutoring, and summer school. So I'm hearing a lot of professional development continuing in our plan going forward. I wanted to find out if you have looked at the impact of tutoring in particular, since we're going to continue to do that, and actually we're offering that up now to families to help fill the gap. So just, are you looking at that? Because it was a major intervention and investment at the start.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Silvestri, for that question. As it relates to tutoring, we have started preliminary analysis around that. As you know, it's also aligned to what is expected connected to the blueprint. And so as we think about that, we have requirements to that. So we have done some preliminary analysis around the impact of tutoring that once we have finalized that, we can share with you more to show what we found related to that. And we brought summer school to you all last summer, and we are continuing to evaluate this most recent summer's impact as well on students.
So when will we see the tutoring data?
We could share with you soon, meaning within the next few weeks, what we've already completed as it aligns to the blueprint for mailing. So you can see that preliminary information.
Thank you. So just remembering that what we've asked teachers and students to do was to learn this year's standards and to learn the things that they didn't get the year before, right? So that's a tall ask, that's a tall order for anyone. And so as we can see in the data, we were able to do that for some, but not for particular fifth and, is that fifth and 11th, 8th and 11th? 8th and 11th graders. We did have a very disruptive year. Let's not forget that. We had a lot of students out. We had attendance issues. We have, it was not a normal year, to say the least. I'm not making excuses. I'm just reminding ourselves. And I hear you, what you say about the curriculum rollout, right? It's started before the pandemic, but really during the pandemic. And so we're not really seeing the fruits of that work yet. I guess you did professional development last year. You did data analysis last year. What is different? What's going to make a impact this time around that you didn't have last year or so?
Our ability to be more strategic in how we use that data. And so, as you said, data analysis is just a part of what we do. We're constantly doing it. But as we were talking about what that then means for how we differentiate support for schools, I think that we're being more intentional about that for this school year. And as well as really working within the classroom more than we did last year. As you said, with the disruptions, our focus is on everyone speaking the same language as far as what we expect to see in our classrooms, and being able to be in classrooms to see that happening, to evaluate where we are on the ground in schools. And so it's really about being more strategic. I think that's really a change that we're implementing this year through data analysis and through our work directly with schools.
And Ms. Logan, if I may, I just want to point to my right again. You see all of our associate superintendents, our directors from the Office of School Support and Wellbeing. You see Ms. Hazel and Dr. Pugh here, along with Dr. Rubin, Jackie, I see you, Curriculum Instruction, Maria. This is it. To me, this actually represents one of the biggest differences that we have not been able to accomplish to support our schools cohesively. In our constant commitment to being transparent, one of the things we actually said in terms of how we wanted to make sure we design the support for the schools differently is to make sure that these teams, I didn't see everybody in the back, these teams are working together, because supporting the principal, the assistant principal around the instructional leadership, and then what happens in the classroom, there cannot be a disconnect. And so Dr. Pugh and Ms. Rubin are connected in this way because they recognize and have put in place a process in which both offices really do their work together side by side. And so I think that's one of the biggest differences in processes of how we support schools. And we've heard from our schools. If you're, when we were coming off from getting some evaluation from our schools said we want central office support to be more coordinated. And so, much of the process that Dr. Logan is talking about really does emphasize how do we do that. So, but we're not only supporting the teacher in the classroom, we're supporting that team of teachers in looking at student data. We're not only supporting that team of teachers, we're supporting the principals and assistant principals who have to support them in doing that work. And when I say support, that means better understanding of data analysis. Who's learning in your classroom? How do you know that? What are the practices that you see in terms of how do we put supports in place when they are learning to further that learning? How do we put supports in place when they're not? And identify specifically what is it that is the deficiency in that learning space that's not allowing them to be successful on a concept. So, I'm so glad you raised that question. It's a great one because as we continue to evaluate our processes and how we do our work, I feel like that was a big part of this, what this presentation was really stating today. And Ms. Madraski, you asked, what does it look like? A big part of it is a shift in how we support what happens in that classroom, which we've heard loud and clear.
Yeah, so again, I thought that was happening all along. And so, and I want to be able to tell parents and community members what we mean by we're going to be more strategic, because that doesn't mean a whole lot to folks. So maybe I could be a part of some of your site visits or just the work in action so that I can better understand it. Because again, I thought we were doing those so long. It doesn't sound new and going to have a different result.
If I could just add in, last year we were doing a lot of still contract tracing, still doing a lot of absences. Teachers were filling in for each other. There were a lot of operational needs that were happening in every school system. I think one of the concrete examples that I can tell you about what will be different is that Dr. Rubin is setting up professional learning for her principals, and she's doing it through the directors who have their cluster meetings directly with their principals. So that's the first level. And so we will have somebody from curriculum and somebody from special education participating in the planning of that learning with the directors, so that it is a unified approach. And what school leaders hear and see in terms of the tools that they get, they'll be the same. So I think that's one example. Another example would be working with the reading and math specialists. We'll state of math since we're talking about math. So the math specialists, they'll have cohesive professional learning around what's happening in that unit of study that they're in, right? What does that look like? So it won't just be nebulous, we'll break apart the standards, now go forth and do. It will be a setup where they're actually working together to look at the standards, look at the performance level descriptors, determine what the instructional approaches are, which validates the approach of problem solving in mathematics, right? And it is a shift for teachers, and it is hard to allow middle schoolers to get up and work in small groups on their own. There's some structures and some help that we can give in terms of pedagogy of how you would do that. So I think the team has some very concrete examples. They're small but mighty, and they have great partners. So I'm very hopeful, and we will know when we see the first set of data what's working, where's it working, and then can be even more, so you said strategic. If there are schools where we're not seeing progress, that's where we can go in and say, we need time with your teachers, time with you, and that time that's in the day where teachers do that collaborative planning. What's the structure we're going to use? What does the data say? What are we planning to do differently? When will we reassess? How will we look at student artifacts? You know, teachers determine those things. They make those good instructional decisions. We can just support with a process. And then once you start seeing achievement, once you start seeing progress, you believe you can do it. That's research-based as well.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to clarify, I meant pre-pandemic, the work of central office supporting schools, that the things that I'm hearing today is the work that you do pre-pandemic. So I was just trying to understand what's different now than what you were doing pre-pandemic. But I appreciate the additional information that you given. Thank you.
Dr. Docker.
Oh, thank you. As you know, when you do these reports with the geometric figures, those are hexagons, right? Well, anyhow, I've talked with you about them before because you've already talked as members of the board about the dissonance with the district and the external and what's going on in the classrooms. And I know that Ms. Wolf mentioned we maybe need to know the schools, but I guess we need to know the profile of those schools so that we'll have some kind of idea of what the differences are. And Mr. Kim talked about 200 years of having problems with being treated equitably. It's really been almost 500 years. But we need to teach equitably. And you mentioned teachers make good instructional decisions. And that's where the anti-racist audit comes in. Are the expectations for certain groups of students different? And are the decisions that teachers make really advancing them? And I just think that we've got to keep working on that. You've got all kinds of curriculum, you've got training that you're doing, but if we don't get at some of those attitudes that, I don't want to say bad things about teachers, but all of us have, that we expect certain kids not to answer the question right away, so we move on to the next, and they never get to be a part of it. They're not encouraged to be a part of it. And these are just simple things that happen that could help them. So that's why I think the anti-racist audit might be very helpful for us.
Thank you, Dr. Daka. And Ms. Mandrowski, you had one quick question.
Yeah, just really
before
quickly.
break.
I did want to say, I appreciate the fact that you're including like special education teachers and hopefully ESOL teachers and all of those other special groups, because they're the biggest discrepancies there, so they need the support as well. My question was really about, you kept mentioning that, it's when you know the basics, everything else kind of grows from there. And for students that are not doing as well as in the upper grades, for example, how often do we reassess the basic and potentially reteach some of those? Because, I always hear concerns about, are we moving students on when they're not ready? Are we saying you don't have a complete knowledge of algebra, but go ahead to geometry or whatever it might be? And how are we looking at whether or not some of what we're seeing at the higher levels really is a result of what they maybe didn't absorb at the lower levels?
So some of that we're able to identify through our MAP data. Measures of academic progress really looks at foundational skills, and teachers can break that data down by student to see the specific strands with foundational learning that may require more support, and they can plan accordingly as they plan their lessons. When there is alignment, they can plan to reinforce for those students who need it. But teachers also collect that data when they're planning grade level instruction, and using some of the checks for understanding or pre-diagnostic tools that I talked about. That, while they're engaging in grade level instruction, they're going to be able to see from the students where there are gaps as well and be able to address them. That's where we talk about that deep content knowledge will allow the teacher to be able to be nimble and to shift. And so you get that as you're providing grade level instruction, and we also can use some of our external measures to be able to give us a full picture of where students are as they enter the students in front of us in the classroom.
So at this time, we're going to take a recess, and we will return at 6:05. Thank you. Welcome back. I'll ask Dr. McKnight to proceed at this time with the, or should I ask Dr. Addison to proceed at this time? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. If we could bring the slide deck up, please. Thank you. And so we continue our conversation with this end-of-year evidence of learning data showing our literacy results. And so similar to what we show for mathematics, we start with the results by our readiness grade levels, grades 2, 5, 8, and 11. Again, looking at our classroom measures, district and external, and then the overall evidence of learning, attainment. And then on the right-hand side of this slide, we see our results for overall evidence of learning attainment for our students receiving free and reduced price meal system services, special education, and emergent multilingual learners. And what you will notice here on this slide as we look across all grade levels for overall EOL, that we have percentages ranging from 60.8% at grade 2, meeting evidence of learning attainment, to a high at grade 8 of 72.7%. Next slide, please. Looking at our grade 2 results in literacy, as we look across our student groups, we notice when we look at the last row, which is the overall evidence of learning attainment, our percentages of students meeting ranges from 37.7% for all other student groups receiving FARMS services to a high for our Asian students not receiving FARMS of 82.9%. Next slide, please. On this slide, we show the change from the end of the 2021 school year compared to the most recent school year. What you will see is we have large percentage point increases across our students receiving services. And so as you look on the left-hand side, you see a 23.4 percentage point increase for our students receiving free and reduced price meal system services, a 35.6 percentage point increase for our emergent multilingual learners. And on the right-hand side, you see a 26.4 percentage point increase for our Hispanic Latino students. And you see a slight decrease for our all other students of down 4 percentage points. One of the things we do want to point out, though, that we acknowledge is that those starting percentages at the end of the 2021 school year were low. And so we do know that, and remember, they were coming out of the pandemic. And so we do want to acknowledge that, and we notice that, but we do want to applaud the progress that we made in that 1 year's time. Next slide, please. Now we look at our grade 5 literacy results, again focusing on that last row overall, which is the extent to which students met 2 out of those 3 measures. As we look across the student groups, we see a low for our Black or African American students receiving farm services of 46.8 to a high for our Asian students not receiving farms of 88.1. Next slide, please. Again, we look at the change from grade 5 at the end of the 2021 school year compared to the end of the 2022 school year. Again, we see positive increases across all racial ethnic groups, as well as across our students receiving services. Again, with our students receiving FARMS with high percentage point increase of 21.5, our emergent multilingual learners, with a 35.9 percentage point increase. And then on the right-hand side, we see a 24.7 percentage point increase for our Hispanic Latino students. I will now turn it over to Ms. Hazel to share some reflections on the data.
Thank you, Dr. Addison, and good afternoon, President Wolf and Dr. McKnight and members of the board. So we are pleased that we are seeing increases in student performance in all of our subgroups with literacy at the elementary level. We still recognize, as Dr. Addison said, that there's a lot of room for improvement, and we recognize that. But today we're going to talk about the shifts we are making to elementary literacy that we think will continue to have students growing and moving in the right direction. We believe that the shifts that we are making will certainly support the board's strategic priorities. So just for a little bit of background, about 1.5 years ago, our office did a lot of internal reflection about the literacy practices taking place in the district. And we also did a lot of research around the science of reading and instructional practices, best practices taking place around the country. And the research says that in order for children to be effective, strong readers, they need instruction where their skills are directly taught and that those skills follow a planned sequence that connects new learning to prior learning. And the research says that for all of our students to have access to effective research-based strategies, and that our teachers need to have the understanding of how to implement those strategies. And one of our moments where we kind of had a little bit of an aha moment as we were rolling out new curriculum with our benchmark curriculum is that we spent a lot of time with our teachers teaching them how to use the curriculum resource. And we needed to spend more time with our teachers on the literacy practices and teaching them how to teach those literacy practices with our students. And so we also recognized that we had limited time for foundational skills instruction at the primary level. And so we really needed to make a shift. And we made the decision that last school year we were going to make a full shift to what we call structured literacy. So science of reading is the umbrella, and how you do it is through that structured literacy process. So just as a reminder, we talked about structured literacy last spring, but it really is that explicit and systematic instruction around our primary literacy skills, foundational literacy skills. And there are 5 skills that we are teaching, 5 components of reading, and they are phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. And so those are the areas that we're really focusing on with our staff as we're training them and instructing our students. So the shift began last school year, where we began training our reading specialists and some of our principals. And we also provided professional learning to the reading specialists. And we piloted 9 elementary schools in structured literacy. And we're going to hear from one of those schools today. Next slide, I'm sorry. There we are. So this is what I just spoke to. We're focused on the balanced literacy in our previous curriculum, and now we are going to be moving to a structured literacy approach this school year. So if you can go to the next slide. So we've been hearing, and we heard Dr. Joftis ask about, again, today, was to talk about implementation, and we talk about those indicators for implementation. We want to really focus on some key areas that we think are going to be really critical for implementation of structured literacy in MCPS. So the 3 areas that we're going to focus on are professional learning. We're going to focus on core grade level instruction for our K-2 students, and we're going to focus on a change to our primary assessment. And so just to talk a little bit about each of those areas, with our professional learning this summer, we provided learning for our K-5 teachers, district-wide learning around early literacy instruction aligned with the science of reading research. And we also had all of the core teams at the elementary level come to professional learning. Our principals, our reading specialists, staff development teachers, assistant principals, they are mainly the ones that are going to be responsible for ensuring the implementation is running smoothly in the schools. And so we have been working with them this summer, and we'll provide them with ongoing training throughout the school year. Some examples of things that we are training on with our science of reading and structured literacy are the use of decodable text, targeted small group instruction, and then again, those 5 key areas of literacy that I mentioned earlier, the phonemic awareness and the phonics and fluency. So those areas will be the direct discussion that we will be having during professional learning, and we will show our teachers how to explicitly teach those skills to our students in a very systematic way. Our instructional specialists in our office and in the other offices that were mentioned earlier will be going into schools. We have identified some specific schools that we know we already want to go in and support and work with, and we will be collecting data on the delivery of the professional learning and really getting an idea of how well teachers are implementing what they learned this summer. The next area of focus is core grade level instruction. So at the K-2 level, we are going to have a strong focus on our foundational skills. We're implementing the Really Great Reading resource with our teachers, and all of our teachers were trained on this resource this summer. The Really Great Reading resource provides explicit instruction on phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and it aligns with the science of reading research. Again, we are working with the Office of Shared Accountability to engage in school visits, and we will have a look-fors list of the practices that we want to see, that the same practices that they learned during their summer training, and we want to make sure that they are implementing them in the classroom. So we have a look-for-us list that we're working with Office of Shared Accountability on so that we can collect data, not in a punitive way, but just so that we know what the strengths are that are taking place, and then what are the areas that we know we need to either go in and provide more support with in the schools, or how we might change our professional learning opportunities so that they are directly aligned with the needs of the staff. And then the final area is ongoing assessment. We have decided to change the assessment for our K-2 students for this year. We will be using the DIBELS assessment. DIBELS stands for Dynamic Indicator of Basic Early Literacy Skills. And we will be going back to the DIBELS. It's not a new assessment to MCPS. We used it a few years ago. We used a very outdated version. We stopped for a little while, and now we're coming back to use the newest version of DIBELS. And it measures growth and progress in early literacy development. And it also assesses skills like letter naming, word recognition, and reading fluency. So all of our schools will administer the DIBELS assessment 3 times a year. And then they also will have progress monitoring opportunities throughout the school year. And our ask of our school core teams and our teachers is that they are using the data at the school level to make decisions about next instructional moves for students. And then for us, at the district level, we'll be monitoring that data to inform our supports and our professional learning. So at this time, we also have with us a presentation, a little video that we want to show you of Fox Chapel Elementary School. They are one of the 9 schools that participated in the pilot. And Fox Chapel is actually having their back to school night tonight. So we really appreciate that they provided a video for us. Mrs. Yates is the principal, and she's at her school, but we are happy to have Mrs. Collins, if you can wave your hand. She's the reading specialist at Fox Chapel Elementary, and if you have questions that I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm sure she may be able to answer them. Before we see the video, I just want to applaud them because they when they started the pilot, 40% of their students in grade K-2 were at or above the benchmark in literacy. And when they ended, 70% were at or above the benchmark. And it does get increasingly more challenging as the year goes on. So we do want to applaud Fox Chapel for their efforts. And these are the types of results that were very encouraging to us and helping us make the decision to transition to this program. So if you can play the video.
10. Nice job.
Here at Fox Chapel, we were very excited to be in the first year of implementation of the Structured Literacy Pilot to better meet student needs based on data and consistent progress monitoring and the research-based instruction.
Good job.
My role as a reading specialist is just to ensure that the teachers have the materials and the resources and the training that they need to implement effective instruction. I worked with the ELA team and other reading specialists to build my capacity so that I could bring that new knowledge back to the teachers here at Fox Chapel so that we could effectively implement this new instruction.
Good.
We are monitoring the effective implementation of structured literacy in our school in many different ways. It starts with collaborative planning.
When we go to collaborative planning, the teachers come with a knowledge of the lessons. We spend a lot of time looking at the lessons, clearing up any misconceptions, answering all of their questions so that when they leave the planning meeting, every single one of them is ready to go back into their classroom to provide that effective instruction.
Data monitoring is a critical piece of growth and improvement. Specifically in K-2, we have DIBELS progress monitoring, which is looking at the student performance on a monthly basis.
The opportunity to come together and analyze the data, the impact of that was profound. The impact in looking at student success, the impact at looking at student sub-skills and their success in those individual tests, and the impact on teacher reflection.
We actually had a first grade teacher yesterday who said half of my students are meeting the targets coming into first grade in the first month because of the instruction they received last year.
The opportunity to look at the foundational skills data and make instructional changes is reflected in what you see from the beginning of the year to the end of the year data and the impact that those changes had on student success.
Can you pull up the slides, please?
Well, while you're pulling up the slides, I do want to just say, I know we had a lot of conversation in the spring about the role of the reading specialist and how important it was to have one in every school. And I just want to thank Ms. Collins for her work and all of the reading specialists, because that's the kind of work we are expecting to see in all of our schools as it relates to supporting this type of implementation and really digging into the data. So thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to continue with our literacy conversation, starting with our secondary. And so we are focused on grade 8 here. And what you'll see as you look at the overall, that last row, the extent to which students are meeting evidence of learning attainment, we see that our percentages range from 52.2% of our Hispanic Latino students receiving farms services meeting evidence of learning attainment, or 2 out of those 3 measures, to a high of 92.7% for our Asian students not receiving farms services. Next slide, please. Here we show the change from the end of the 2021 school year compared to the end of the 2022 school year. On the left-hand side, you see that the majority of our students and our student groups receiving services had increases compared to the previous school year, with a slight decrease for our students receiving special education services. And on the right-hand side, as we look at race ethnicity, we see that most student groups experienced or showed increases compared to last school year, except for our white students and our students identified as 2 or more races. Next slide, please. Transitioning to grade 11 results for evidence of learning attainment for the end of the 2022 school year. As we look at that last row, the overall, we expect our students to meet 2 out of those 3 measures, and that's what that row represents. And so we see for our Hispanic Latino students receiving farms services, 48.7% met 2 out of the 3 measures. And our student group that had the highest percent meeting is our Asian students not receiving farms services. Next slide, please. For grade 11, comparing the end of the 2021 school year to the end of the 2022 school year, on the left-hand side, we see the majority of our students receiving services had increases across those 2 years, with a slight decrease for our students receiving special education services. And again, as we look at the right side for our racial ethnic groups, we see increases for almost all racial ethnic groups, except for a slight decrease for our white students, and then a larger decrease for our all other student group, which is our smaller categories of students enrolled, which includes, again, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander. I will now turn it back over to Ms. Hazel to share additional data reflections and next steps.
Thank you, Dr. Addison. If you can go to the next slide, please. So again, with secondary, we're pleased that we're seeing the numbers moving in the right direction. We have really been focused on an emphasis of having strong first instruction, and we want to make sure that the first instruction is engaging for all of our students and is at grade level. So that is really critical, is that we are teaching to grade level standards and that we are using grade level texts and grade level tasks for our students. We've been really focused on equitable instruction. That has been a theme for throughout our summer training and throughout the school year. And so we want to communicate the message that excellent first instruction is affirming for our students. It's culturally responsive, differentiated, and data-driven. And so that's a big theme of the work that we have been doing throughout this summer and school year. We really are encouraged, as Dr. Logan said, we've been doing a lot of school visits already. We're just in about a month of school, and we're encouraged by what we're seeing at the secondary level, that there's implementation of differentiated small group instruction taking place at secondary. We're seeing collaborative learning with our students taking place and standards aligned instruction. Again, we talked about this quite a bit last year, but the importance of teaching to grade level standards, even though we know that our students may have some skills that either they didn't receive last year or there may be some gaps in learning, the importance of us teaching to grade level is one of the main equitable teaching strategies that there is. And so we want our teachers to make sure that they are planning, teaching to grade level, and scaffolding where needed and providing those supports where needed. So that is really important. We want to recognize our English language development team because they have been aligning the resources for our emergent multilingual learners to grade level standard so that we are raising that level of expectation for our students. We also want to recognize the ELD team and our ELA team, English Language Development and English Language Arts team, thank you, for their collaborative work. We've been talking about this for the last few years around the co-planning, co-teaching, co-assessing, co-reflecting, but teachers are really working together, and we're starting to see more and more of it happening at the secondary level, and we're starting to see the results. So we're really excited about their hard work and just the actionable steps that they are taking with their teachers and the collaboration that we're seeing with resource teacher meetings and as we go in to see the planning that's taking place. We do recognize that for secondary, we saw that grade 8 and 11 for our special education, we are working very closely, and we have our special education partners here with us as well. We're working very closely with them to make sure that that collaboration is taking place and that we are providing students with disabilities access to grade level standards as well with those scaffolds in place. So as we talk about next steps for secondary literacy, we want to continue focusing on equitable instruction. We want to continue the co-teaching and co-planning for our emergent multilingual learners and for our students with disabilities. But I'm really excited about the shift that we're making at secondary. They started this summer with literacy across all of our content areas. It's not just the responsibility of the English teacher to take care of all of the literacy practices, but that we want literacy in science and in social studies and even in mathematics. And so they have been working with schools throughout the summer to talk about the importance of literacy across contents. And they have asked the leaders of those content areas to assess literacy in their departments, and they're going to use that data to provide professional learning and research-based best practices around how you use informational text in all of those areas supporting the literacy practices. We also have 6 middle schools that are working with the University of Maryland on this very effort around literacy across content areas, and so we will be using the information that we learned from those schools to help elevate a larger scale implementation. So we're excited about that work and more to come the next time we meet to provide you some really great updates. Next slide, please. So just want to give an overall summary of our pre-K to 12 literacy. If someone were to ask you, what's the literacy plan in MCPS? This is really summarizes what we are doing to move students in the right direction. We want to ensure that we are providing grade level instruction to all of our students and that our teachers are planning with that end in mind. We are making sure that at the primary level, we are reinforcing strong foundational skills using those 5 reading components that I shared earlier, and developing literacy across all content areas for our secondary students, and then ensuring that all of our students feel affirmed in what they are learning and that they have access to diverse text. So that's an ongoing work that we have in the curriculum office to make sure that we are looking at our texts. We are working with our students to make sure that we are constantly improving the text that we have and students can see themselves in it. Next slide, please. So as we are looking at our strategic priorities and going back to academic excellence for literacy, we're really excited about the fact that the performance target for literacy was 65.9%. And 71.7% of students made the actual target. So it's something to celebrate. I know sometimes we're used to seeing a lot of red, but we want to really celebrate the upward trend that we are seeing for literacy at both the elementary and the secondary level. And we want to just thank all of our teachers for their really hard work and teacher leaders in supporting them. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up this section, our goal is to have very strong first instruction for our students that includes equitable teaching practices. And in order for this to happen, we need to have the strong collaboration. You've been hearing about it, and all the folks that's sitting on this side working together to provide support to our teachers and our teacher leaders and principals. And it's really important that we are all working together. All of our students, you know, are very diverse, have a range of strengths and needs, and it is really the professional learning communities in schools that are really going to, and you saw it in the video with Fox Chapel, I think that is an excellent example of a professional learning community that is really committed to taking the time to understand content standards deeply, committed to analyzing the data, committed to understanding where to move students next. And that's really what a strong professional learning community does. And our goal, because that work is not easy, it's very challenging and it takes time. And so all of us are here to support the schools and are committed to making sure that we have the supports that they need to move the students and provide that professional learning that they need to get through and have even higher achievement for their students. So we look forward to coming back to you with an update on our implementation strategies, and our hope is that we continue to see an upward trend with our student performance. So President Wolf, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Thank you. At this time, I'll call on Mr. Kim.
Yes, thank you again for the presentation about literacy. There was just one piece I first wanted to highlight about ensuring access to diverse text. There really is no way to overstate the importance of students being able to see themselves in the classroom and reflected in what they learn. So that is a critical step, making sure that our classrooms have access to those texts and they're being implemented in a way where students, they're reaching students and students are being reflected in what they learn. I did want to ask one question. I was curious about how in both math and literacy, it looks like the greatest leaps in improvement lie in the elementary school level. When looking at 2021 to 2022, I was kind of curious about, is that just kind of due to the nature of the effect the pandemic had and the nature of what was being learned in the classrooms, or just kind of any explanation as to why?
Well, certainly for literacy, even though we just started with the structured literacy this year, we've been prepping schools. Our team up there has been prepping schools for this work all of last school year. And I know that a lot of schools wanted to get started very early with the implementation. So we certainly think that just understanding what the research said, starting to go to training certainly helped. And we also, I think that even though we don't have the district-wide data yet, we also have a lot of great anecdotal feedback about the tutoring and other supports that were taking place. So certainly I think that helped. We know that the numbers of tutors at the elementary level are much larger than at the middle school and high school level.
Ms. Harris?
Yeah, well, Ms. Hazel, Dr. Logan, this is very, I think, exciting. And, I mean, I really do think this is what it looks like when the first question you're asking is, how do we serve students best? And then the second thing you do is, how do we hold ourselves accountable to that work as a system? And I mean, this is amazing. I'm really excited to hear more as things go on. And I just have a couple of basic questions. And I did want to echo what Mr. Kim said about the texts, but I was also really happy looking at slide 29, how we are really focusing on effective programming for our emerging multilingual learners. So I know that's been a challenge and a pinch point for us for a while. But I did just want to know, so you mentioned there are 6 middle schools that are doing a project with the University of Maryland around, the literacy work around all content areas, and I'm just wondering which middle schools are those? Putting you on the spot, sorry.
Yes. I'm going to have Jackie Lightsey, who's our supervisor of literacy, secondary literacy, come up to share.
And so just coming attractions, I was also interested to know, so we piloted the science of reading in 9 elementary schools last year, and what the other 8 are aside from Fox Chapel. So I'm assuming you've got a cohort now that's your kind of benchmark as the other 131 elementary schools are coming online with this.
Yes, and we learned a lot from that implementation, and so we're using that to kind of inform the work that we're doing for this school year.
They've all had the same type of results?
Yes, similar results. Ms. Lightsey, you want to take your...
Sure. So the 6 middle schools, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, pop quiz time, are Gaithersburg, Eastern, Montgomery Village, Poole, Odessa Shannon, and Newport Mill.
Great. Nicely done. Write this down. Thank you. And what were the other, if you can remember, the other 8 elementary schools that did your pilot last year with science of reading?
I'll get those for you.
Okay. Yeah. No rush. Yep. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Amazing.
Ms. Mandrowski?
Thank you. I too just want to say thank you for the presentation. Very exciting to see, things moving in the right direction. Similar to the math, my one concern being the discrepancy between our classroom testing versus our district-wide testing, particularly at the elementary school level. So however we're addressing that, I don't know if that means we're changing our test or whatever, but how you want to address that. And then my other brief question is about the literacy grade 11 for the Hispanic Latino students on farms. I'm wondering if there's any correlation, do you think, between that particular subgroup and the number of students coming to us with interrupted education, and how we might be addressing that, if that is the issue?
So that could certainly be one area. We did note grade 11 is an area that we are digging into to find out why that data looks so different than the other grade levels. So we're digging into that, and we can get back to you with more answers.
Thank you.
Ms. Silvestri?
Thank you. I wanted to ask if you've looked at our data in comparison to comparable districts. Are other districts of our size and of our resources seeing the same types of results? I know we did well in some areas and other areas not so much. How do we fare in comparison to the rest of the country?
Great question.
So we can, I was talking to Dr. Addison, we can look at the data for MAP to do some comparison.
Or just in Maryland, for example?
Yes, and we can certainly find that information out as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we should keep in mind is that we have the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program results. So remember, we haven't taken that state assessment for a while, and students across the state of Maryland just took that this past spring. And so those results will be coming from the state in early January. So that will be another opportunity for us to kind of compare ourselves to other districts in the state as it relates to literacy and math.
Great, great. And Mr. Kim's question, I mean, our lower up, K-2 had the lowest data last year, and therefore they had the greatest gains to make. Hence, that might be why we are seeing those gains now. But I would love to understand if you could explain to me in layman's terms, because I'm hearing several terms: structured literacy, our curriculum benchmarks, and then teaching to standards. Layman's terms, really, this is an honest question. How do those things intersect?
So when we talk about teaching to standard, we're talking about the Maryland College and Career Readiness Standards, or the Common Core before. So every grade level has certain indicators, standards, objectives or skills that we need to teach the students. Oftentimes those skills build on one another as they get older, from grade level to grade level. So in literacy, it might be identifying problem and solution, or give me another skill, I'm trying to think.
Solving two-step equations.
Main idea, thank you, literacy. I'm trying to think literacy. Main idea. It might be something studying author's point of view. So those might be the standard that a student is trying to achieve, or a skill. And every grade level has a set for each content area. Benchmark Advance is our curriculum that we are using, and they are aligned to our standards. So they provide lessons in literacy, and those lessons are aligned. So every school district in Maryland who's using the Maryland College and Career Readiness Standards, they might be using different curriculum, but the lessons are all aligned to those skills or standards. Benchmark just did not have enough foundational skills instruction. And so that was one of the things that we learned as we were looking at the curriculum. It just didn't have enough foundational skills work for our primary students. So we felt we needed to go find a different resource and provide a different kind of training for our teachers around how to implement those skills, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency. Okay. So we are working to use both. Well, at the primary level, the main resource will be really great reading, but we will also be using the benchmark curriculum as well. Okay. We also know, and we've had a lot of feedback from our teachers and parents about benchmark, and so we are in the process because they have a newer version. We met with them every week for a year and a half to give them feedback about what we were seeing. And so some of the feedback was around foundational skills. Some of the feedback was around the choice of text and wanting to have more diversity in text. And so we have given them a lot of feedback around generally what we're seeing in the curriculum and specific lessons. And they have made major changes to their newest version. And so we actually have a set of schools this school year who are implementing that newest version of the benchmark curriculum so that we can determine whether or not we want to continue using the benchmark, the newer version of benchmark. And so we are in the process of looking at that, and we'll probably go through RFP to make a determination.
So remembering back one of my first board meetings where we had the same presentation, evidence of learning, and I think it was the first time that I heard the need for us to be teaching to grade level standards because we were not.
Yes.
So am I hearing you correctly that the work of teaching to grade level standards is now translated to implementing the curriculum with fidelity? Or are those not the same thing?
They are very similar. If you're teaching the curriculum to fidelity, you're teaching the grade level standards. However, we do want teachers to have the professional judgment to make some adjustments if needed. But the goal is still, and that's why it's so important in these professional learning communities, to understand what it means to teach at grade level standard. So if you are making adjustments, you're still keeping it at that grade level standard and not lowering the standard for students.
Okay. Thank you.
And you bring up a good question, and we had a conversation going back to your question in the math area, and you asked what was different pre-pandemic. That was the difference, is that we had a curriculum that was not written to grade level standard. And so when we purchased a curriculum that is at grade level standard, we need to do some work with our teachers to make sure they know how to scaffold and provide the skills for students to be learning at grade level. And then we went into a pandemic, and we just got a little sidetracked. And now we're back to a place where we are really focused on teaching those grade level standards with our new curriculum.
Thank you for that. I think it's super important for us to understand that in terms of where we are. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Joftis, did I see your hand? No? Okay. I just have one question. The numbers for Latino students are extremely impressive. So can you talk a little bit about what you see going on there?
Yes.
That we might need to model at every school?
Well, I don't know about every school, but we've been looking at our two-way immersion programs, and Dr. Addison has been sharing data with us, and we do see that we're getting some really nice results at our two-way immersion schools. So that's why I say I don't know about every school, but we certainly want to dig in to see where we may be able to implement some more of that type of programming. We also, as you recall, with our emergent multilingual learners that had a significant interruption in learning, we used to have a METS program at the elementary level, and we stopped that program and had those students return to their home schools. And then we have the coaches that we were able to hire through our additional funding, and those coaches are going out into the schools and providing support either directly to the student or working with the staff. And we're seeing nice results. Those students are exiting out of that program faster than they were in the previous model. So those are two things that I think we can call out immediately where we're seeing some nice results for our emergent multilingual learners.
I would just add, as well, at the secondary level, the work around co-teaching. With ELD and ELA, they have been really closely working together and working with schools to implement that.
Okay, I don't see any other lights. I want to thank you for an excellent presentation, and I want to thank Fox Chapel. I know that it's for everything for coming out today, so thank you. Look forward to the next report, hoping to see some increases in math.
Yes.
But I do think I'd like to get, when you send that breakdown of schools in math, I'd like to see literacy too. Okay, thank you. All right. We are now up to our consent items. Is there any item that anyone wishes to pull?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Item 9.5, please.
9.5. Ms. Mandrowski?
9.2 and 9.3.
Okay, so can I get a motion to move 9.1, 9.4 in block?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous. Okay, 9.2?
Yeah. Sorry, thanks. I was hoping somebody could speak to what this is going to look like in terms of how our students are going to access it, and if there are other providers, if we have students who are currently receiving Zoom therapy through a private provider, how does that particular provider become approved through MCPS to participate in that program?
Ms. Rubin? Or someone from your office?
I'm happy to speak.
Oh, there you go.
So good evening, members of the board. I wanted to share that those are all still what we are working with the agencies in order to provide that best support. So the therapeutic services, both in person and virtual, are targeted towards our elementary schools and our middle schools. The service areas for the students will be determined in part by a number of factors, including farms rate, including needs of the school, including some of the assessments that we do, such as the risk assessments. I won't name them all, in order to determine the schools that will receive the support and what portion of the support. The agencies that are listed are the agencies that will be working with our students. So there won't be separate agencies, for example, a student's private therapist or a student's private provider that will be providing the service virtually. And I hope that answers the question, Ms. Mondrowski.
Not really, but I'm not sure that it can be answered. Maybe we can talk offline. Thank you.
Sure. Dr. Chester or I are happy to sit and meet about it. These services, the way that they're estimated to begin November 15th. So a part of the process will be determining exactly what they will look like. Because they are for both in-person and virtual, we know that will be a mixed model, and the way that model will be applied will depend on the individual school needs. So it's a variety of ways that this can look. And we're happy to present more about that at a later date once we've begun working with the agencies about those school-specific needs.
Okay, I'd be interested in better understanding what, if there are and what they are, any liability issues in reference to an outside provider, if it's particularly like if it's a Zoom call.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And that's something that we think about as well, something that we work with Office of General Counsel and other partners with. One thing that we can feel comfort in is the providers listed, including JESA, our agencies that we already work with within our schools. So they already have services within our schools presently, both last year and this year. So in terms of some of those factors that we would consider about trustworthiness, about the services that they provide, that's something that we already do have some comfort with. I think maybe you're referring to, in terms of liability, maybe how students might be monitored as they access.
Do parents have to sign a waiver or something like that to allow service?
So the same rules apply that are current. So in order to access therapeutic services, parents do have to consent for students under the age of 12. There are instances where if a student is determined to be mature enough to consent themselves over the age of 12, you can consent. So none of the rules or laws will change in terms of therapy services provided. The same ones that are in place now are the same that will go forward, whether it's virtual or in person.
Okay. Carla, did you have something?
Just a follow-up question, different contract, but we do have a telehealth contract.
That's what I thought this was. No?
This is not the big telehealth contract. This is with local providers. The telehealth is a national firm, correct?
So it is with telehealth. This is a mix of services, including an extension of telehealth services as well as in-person services with both providers listed.
But last year, we had a big telehealth contract. I don't know the name of the company. I guess my question is, are students already benefiting from that, or is that still being set up?
So I think that, and I don't want to speak for anything that
can
might
get
be
that,
in
Shawnee.
pilot. Go ahead.
Right. So the RFP process is where we are with the larger telehealth offering. So there was extensive budgetary components that went into that, and we were really appreciative of that. But that is going through the RFP process currently for us to select the vendors for that broad-based, more global telehealth work.
Thank you.
All right, 9.3.
Yep, thank you. This is about the radio communications, the extensions of the contract. And I know you kind of touched on it a little bit this morning, but I wanted to just get a better clarity as to what this contract is specifically for. Are these for new items, replacement items? Is this, what is this funding for? Because I assume we already have radios in all of our schools, so go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that question. It's actually for a combination of both. It's for new items, it's for replacements. It also contains the parts and accessories that go for the radios, and it's for schools and offices across the district. And so what happens is we will need the contract for us to be able to remain current. We have some radios that are on analog and that we need to change over so that they're on the digital platform. So it encompasses everything. So it keeps us current and up to date. It also keeps schools serviceable, and they can also order them through our hub.
So in the spirit of some of the testimony we heard this morning, will any of this, and will this company be one to address some of the concerns about the workability inside some of our schools or certain areas, pockets of our school areas that?
That's a little bit different. What will happen is at each of the sites, the radios are kind of programmed for that particular location. So that's one of the pluses that will help us. The analog to dialogue component, just trying to keep up. To digital to keep up with where we are in terms of technology, definitely will. But in terms of the spaces where we may not receive service, that's something that we just continue to work through and know where those locations are.
Okay. I didn't know. I know you had mentioned, someone had mentioned before about, what are they called? The things you, I think of an extension or extenders for like even things like the police communications and stuff. I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that at all.
We do have some locations that do have the extenders, and at our opening of school presentation, we discussed that we would come back and provide additional information where we saw those spaces and where we might have extenders and where it might be more applicable there. In places where we don't have them, to be able to help the locations that have those quote-unquote low spots.
Thank you.
Ms. Harris, 9.5.
Yes, hi. I was just going to have Ms. Sharon come and give a very brief overview of this special appropriation request for the teacher device choice pilot, what it is and why we're doing it.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. We are very excited about this in an effort to continually think about how we are innovating with technology to meet the needs of our staff. One of the things that we are going to be piloting through the special appropriation, if it goes through the county council, is a teacher choice device pilot for teacher retention. I know it's a mouthful, but the purpose of this pilot is really to think about how we create opportunities for teachers to have choice in how they utilize and what device they have as their main teaching tool, so that they can basically think about how they can innovate through equitable teaching and learning by having a device that they can use that was their choice. One of the things that we heard throughout the pandemic, particularly when we started at the beginning of the pandemic and we had to do that mass distribution of technology, is we heard teachers say, well, we didn't choose this device, or maybe this is not the device I was most comfortable with. So that is something that we have heard, and we've heard over the years in the technology office how important it is to have choice in what they have. So this pilot is to basically study whether or not providing teachers a choice of their device is an opportunity for them to really feel that they are able to do their job better, that they're able to innovate instructionally, and whether or not this adds to job satisfaction and retention in the teaching field. So our goal is to pilot this in 3 schools and to study it very closely to see how we can start off as a pilot and evaluate the success to then expand.
I have a follow-up question to that. So the teachers are getting to be included in what they're going to be using in terms of devices. What about the training for our IT staff that would need to go along with that?
It's an excellent question, Ms. Wolf, and that goes hand in hand. Frequently, when we look at technology, we pride ourselves in the technology offices and strategic initiatives of being kind of invisible, right? Everyone's happy with the technology until all of a sudden it breaks. So a lot of times we forget all of the support work that needs to go into this. So we are going to be working side by side with the ITSSs. This is one of the reasons we wanted to pilot this in a very small scale with only 3 schools, because we're going to individually work with the support staff that are going to be supporting those schools through central office and making sure that they have what they need to support the staff.
Thank you. So there is training available
Absolutely.
for them. Okay,
I have
thank
a
you.
follow-up question as well.
Go ahead,
Just
Ms.
the
Petrosky.
virtual academy, are we incorporating any aspect of that in the testing, the pilot aspect? I mean, we've gotten testimony in the past about concerns about them needing slightly different, potentially needing some slightly different technology, and I wasn't sure if they're being participating in this.
Well, we haven't selected the schools, we haven't finalized the school selection, but all of the schools, including the virtual academy, would be part of the evaluation. So there's multiple factors that go into determining which of the schools are going to be a good match.
Okay, so can I get a motion to move 9.2, 9.3, and 9.5 in block?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you. We are now up to item number 10. So can I get a motion to move 10.1 and 10.2 in block?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous. At this time, I do have some new business. Does anyone else have any new business? Okay, the item, I want to acknowledge an error. We announced that the Walk to School Day would be October the 5th. October the 5th is a non-instructional day. The board will amend the resolution and reinforce that Walk to School Day is October the 12th, 2022. We apologize for any confusion, but remain committed to this wonderful nationwide opportunity. So can I get a motion to amend the resolution?
I move to amend the resolution Walk to School Day to change October 5th, 2022 to October 12th, 2022.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you. Item number 11 is for information only. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you. We're now adjourned.